while my son was handed the keys to a stunning $3.5 million estate in the Southern Hills. I inherited a crumbling, forgotten farm from my late wife. When he discovered the details of the will, he branded me a useless old man and gave me exactly 22 days to pack my things and get out. Left with no other choice, I drove 2 hours to sleep in a dilapidated country house I had never even laid eyes on before. But the moment I turned a rusted, heavy key in the lock of that old farmhouse, I was left completely breathless by the secrets waiting inside. Hey everyone, welcome to this channel. Before we dive into today's journey, please hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We always love hearing from the community. Just a quick note. This is a fictional story crafted to entertain, inspire, and spark deep reflection. Any resemblance to real names, places, or events is purely coincidental, but the core message is what truly matters here. Now, let's discover what Arthur found. The polished mahogany table feels suffocatingly wide. Margaret Sterling sits at the head, her sleek leather portfolio wide open, reading glasses perched delicately on the bridge of her nose. I sit quietly on one side. Julian and Clara sit directly across from me. My son and his wife are both leaning forward eagerly, looking as though they are waiting for the grand prize on a game show finale. It has been exactly 7 days since I lost Evelyn. 7 agonizing days of profound numbness, interrupted only by the delivery of casseroles from neighbors I barely recognize. 7 days of Julian, helping with the funeral arrangements, a task that mostly involved him pacing in the other room taking endless business calls while I sat paralyzed by the window. Now we are here. Margaret clears her throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Thank you both for being here today. We will now proceed with the reading of Evelyn Caldwell Preston's last will and testament, officially executed on October 18, 2022. 6 months before she passed away. She knew exactly what she was doing. She planned this. Margaret adjusts her glasses. To my beloved son, Julian James Preston. Julian instantly straightens his posture. Clara's perfectly manicured hand finds his under the table. I leave the primary family residence located at 4217 Oakwood Estates, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Current appraised value, $3.5 million. Clara lets out a soft, breathless gasp. Julian's jaw tightens in an attempt to look stoic, but a greedy gleam dances in his eyes. Margaret continues reading. Additionally, I leave the investment portfolio managed by Sterling Wealth Management, current value $6 million, and the entirety of my executive retirement accounts through Hayes Energy Solutions, current value $2.5 million, $12 million. I do the math automatically in my head. It's an old teacher's habit I can't shake. 12 million to Julian. Margaret slowly turns a crisp page. To my husband, Arthur Preston. My heavy heart gives a hard thud against my ribs. Here it comes. I leave the rural family property located in Ocmulgee County, Oklahoma. This encompasses 800 acres, including the original farmhouse and all outbuildings. Current county appraisal, $180,000. Total silence fills the room. Julian blinks rapidly. Wait, what? Margaret looks up calmly. The Ocmulgee County property. Your mother inherited it directly from her grandparents. It has been a part of the Caldwell family lineage since 1947. Julian leans back into his leather chair, and I watch a myriad of emotions cross his face. First confusion, then cold calculation, and finally a sneer of utter disgust. A dirt farm, that's really it. Julian, I start to say, trying to keep the peace. Dad gets a dirt farm. He barks a sharp, ugly laugh. Mom left him a falling-down shack and 800 acres of absolute nothing. Clara touches his arm nervously. Honey, please no, this is insane. Julian glares at Margaret. There has to be some kind of clerical mistake. Dad can't even manage that. He's a retired high school history teacher. He doesn't know the first thing about agriculture or farming. That place is a worthless money pit. Margaret's professional expression doesn't waver. The documentation is crystal clear, Julian. Your mother was exceptionally specific about this exact distribution. Specific. Julian violently shakes his head. Right, specific. I know I should say something. I should vehemently defend Evelyn, I should defend myself, but my throat is constricted with grief. I just stare blindly at the thick folder in Margaret's hands, desperately trying to make sense of this reality. Why the farm? Evelyn never even spoke of the place. I had never once visited it in our 40 years of marriage. Margaret continues softly. Oh, there is also a sealed letter here addressed to Arthur, bearing strict instructions that it must only be opened upon arrival at the property. She slides a thick, cream-colored envelope across the smooth mahogany. I instantly recognize Evelyn's elegant handwriting. Arthur, open at the farm, trust me. I pick it up, my weathered hands trembling slightly. Julian stands up so abruptly his chair scrapes loudly against the hardwood. This is completely unbelievable. I'm hiring a lawyer immediately. Margaret's voice remains remarkably calm, almost bored by his outburst. That is entirely your right. However, I will inform you right now that your mother's will was drafted by one of the absolute finest estate attorneys in the state of Oklahoma. It is legally ironclad. If you choose to contest it, you will waste a massive amount of money only to arrive at the exact same result. Julian glares daggers at her, then pivots his furious gaze to me. Dad, you are not seriously going to sit there and accept this. My voice cracks terribly. I clear my throat, forcing the words out. Your mother wanted me to have the farm. The farm. He spits the word out as though it were toxic poison. You're 68 years old, Dad. You're going to live your final years in some rotting, falling down shack in the middle of nowhere. I don't know, I say very quietly, looking down at the envelope. I haven't even seen it yet. Clara stands up gracefully, placing a soothing hand on Julian's tense shoulder. We should leave, honey. Let your dad process all of this. Julian aggressively grabs his designer coat. As he reaches the doorway, he stops and looks back with cold eyes. You know what, Dad? Fine. Enjoy your precious dirt farm. But don't you dare come crying to me when you finally realize Mom left you nothing but a massive tax burden. The heavy door slams shut, echoing through the room. Margaret and I sit in profound silence. She slowly takes off her reading glasses and pinches the bridge of her nose. I'm incredibly sorry you had to witness that display, I say, feeling a deep sense of shame. I've seen far worse in this business. She looks at me, a deep, genuine sympathy shining in her eyes. Arthur, your wife loved you more than words can say. I worked intimately with her for well over a year on this exact estate plan. She was very, very deliberate in her choices. I just don't understand why, I whisper. Open the letter when you finally get to the farm, Margaret says gently. She wanted you to see the property first. I nod silently, no longer trusting my voice not to break. She hands me a heavy, rusted key. This opens the main farmhouse in Ocmulgee County, about 2 hours west of here. The precise address is written on the deed. I take the key. It feels heavy and old-fashioned, the kind of antique brass hardware you rarely see anymore. One more thing, Margaret adds softly. Your wife mentioned that you might have several questions. If you do, you can call my personal line anytime, day or night. Thank you. I drive back home. No, I correct myself, it isn't my home anymore. I drive back to the mansion that Julian now legally owns. The beautiful house where Evelyn and I lived happily for 18 years. The exact house where she passed away in our master bedroom, holding my hand tightly and whispering her final, cryptic words. Trust the farm, Arthur. Everything you need is there. I didn't understand her words then, and I certainly don't understand them now. It's nearly 8:00 p.m. when Julian finally shows up. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed in the small guest room. He had already informed me earlier that the master bedroom was strictly off-limits. He was having it refreshed, forcing me to hurriedly pack the few personal items I managed to grab from my old study before his expensive contractors started ripping out Evelyn's custom bookshelves. He doesn't bother knocking. He simply pushes the door open and walks in, a manila folder gripped in his hand. We need to have a talk. I remain seated on the edge of the narrow bed. Okay. He shoves the folder toward me. This is your official eviction notice, legally binding and everything. You have exactly 22 days to completely vacate the premises. I open the folder. It is printed on official legal letterhead. Notice to vacate. 22 days. Julian, this has been my house for nearly 2 decades. Dad, Clara and I are planning on starting a family very soon. We desperately need the space. He crosses his arms defensively. You've got the farm now, you can go live out there. I haven't even seen the condition of the place. Then you'd better go see it. His voice is completely devoid of warmth. Look, I'm really not trying to be overly harsh here, but Mom made her final choice. She left you that rural property, so use it. He turns to leave but pauses in the doorway, a smirk playing on his lips. Oh, and Dad, don't even think about taking anything valuable when you pack up. I've already had an appraiser make an inventory list. The antique silver, the fine art, Mom's jewelry collection, it's all legally mine. It was physically in the house, which means it's part of the estate I inherited. Julian. But he is already walking down the hallway. I sit completely alone in the tiny guest room of what used to be my sanctuary, clutching a rusted antique key in one hand and a cold legal eviction notice in the other. Outside the window, I can hear Julian on his cell phone, laughing heartily about something trivial. I look down at the cream envelope Margaret had given me. Evelyn's beautiful, familiar handwriting. Trust me. Evelyn, I whisper into the empty, darkening room. What on earth did you leave me? The heavy brass key feels like a weight in my palm. 22 days until I am thrown out onto the street. 22 days to somehow figure out why my brilliant wife of 40 years left me 800 acres of barren dirt in the middle of absolute nowhere. The jarring sound of heavy diesel engines violently pulls me from a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. It's 6:00 a.m., and the entire house is already vibrating. I stumble bleary-eyed to the window. 3 massive contractor trucks are parked haphazardly in the driveway. White utility vans bearing the logo *Hayes Construction on their sides. Men wearing scuffed hard hats begin aggressively unloading heavy equipment, massive toolboxes, and thick extension cords. A massive metal rolling dumpster scrapes horribly against our pristine concrete driveway. Julian stands proudly on the front porch, dressed in a sharp designer suit, coffee mug in hand, gesturing animatedly toward the east wing. Evelyn's private office. I hastily throw on yesterday's wrinkled clothes and rush downstairs. The heavy front door is propped wide open, allowing the bitter, cold March air to pour into the foyer. I can hear loud, booming voices and the thud of heavy steel-toed boots stomping on Evelyn's beloved hardwood floors. "Excuse me," I start to say. One of the burly workers nearly runs me over while carrying a heavy-duty drill. "Morning, sir. You'll want to stay clear of the east wing. It's demo day." Demo day. He says it so casually, like tearing apart a life is just another Tuesday job. I follow the sickening noise toward Evelyn's office. The heavy oak door is wedged wide open. 2 men are already brutally yanking her precious leather-bound books off the custom shelves, carelessly tossing them into massive black trash bags. A third worker is using a drill to unscrew the beautiful brass nameplate from her door. Evelyn C. Preston, CEO. Wait, my voice cracks with sudden panic. Those are her personal books, her favorite authors. Julian suddenly appears right behind me, still casually sipping his expensive coffee. "These guys are on a very tight schedule, Dad. Let them do their work. You didn't even warn me they were coming today. I explicitly told you that renovations were starting this week." He takes another slow sip. "This is week 1. I watch in horror as a worker carelessly grabs a beautiful framed photograph right off Evelyn's desk. It's a picture of us at the grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for Hayes Energy's very first office back in 1997. She's wearing a ridiculous white hard hat, grinning from ear to ear. I am standing right beside her, bursting with pride. "Wait, that's..." I step forward desperately. "Can I please just have that?" The worker pauses and looks questioningly at Julian. Julian looks at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assesses the object. "The frame is solid sterling silver, Dad. It's worth about $1,800. It stays with the estate." "I don't care about the silver frame. I just want the photograph inside it." Julian gives a dismissive nod to the worker. "Dumpster." The worker casually carries it past me. I watch helplessly as my favorite memory disappears down the long hallway toward the trash. Another worker is now brutally prying Evelyn's locked desk drawers open with a heavy iron crowbar. The beautiful antique wood splinters and snaps. I literally feel something inside my chest crack right along with it. "Julian, please stop this. Your bedroom is next on the list," he says coldly. "The professional movers arrive at noon to completely clear it out. Guest room only for you, remember." I can't stomach watching it anymore. I retreat back upstairs, my ears loudly ringing with the destructive sounds of my wife's life being aggressively dismantled. In the guest room, I sit heavily on the narrow, uncomfortable bed. 21 days until I am legally forced to leave this house. I slowly pull out my worn leather wallet. Tucked safely inside is a photograph, the one precious thing I made absolutely sure to grab yesterday. It's Evelyn and me on our wedding day, June 18, 1983. I was 28 years old, a passionate but broke high school history teacher barely making $26,000 a year. She was 24, fresh out of her grueling grad school program with a geology degree and an entry-level job offer from a tiny, unknown oil exploration company. We got married quietly at the downtown courthouse. There was no fancy, expensive reception. It was just the two of us, two random witnesses, and a cheap honeymoon weekend spent in Branson. 2 years later, Julian was born. I took a week off from teaching to help. Evelyn took barely 3 months of maternity leave before she rushed back to work. She hated sitting idle at home. She absolutely loved the gritty field work, the massive rigs, the intense corporate negotiations. I honestly didn't mind it. I truly loved teaching history. I loved having my summers off. I loved that our son had a mother who was fierce, brilliant, and fiercely driven, and who absolutely never apologized for her ambition. In 1995, Evelyn took a massive leap and started her own independent company, Hayes Energy Solutions. I was incredibly skeptical at first. We had a large mortgage and a 10-year-old kid, but she was unshakably certain. "Arthur, I know this chaotic industry. I know exactly how to conquer this." She was incredibly right. By the year 2000, she was officially a self-made millionaire. By 2005, we bought the massive Oakwood Estates mansion with cash. I was still happily teaching. She had repeatedly offered to let me retire early, but I always firmly said no. I loved my history students. I loved the rhythm of the school year. Julian grew up completely enveloped in that massive house. He grew up incredibly wealthy. Elite private schools, brand new luxury cars for his birthday, extravagant winter ski trips to Aspen. I watched him slowly drift further and further away from us, or perhaps just away from me. He was always far more captivated by the pursuit of money than the value of people. Then came August 2021. Evelyn came home early from a routine doctor's appointment, sat me down heavily at the kitchen island, and quietly said 4 devastating words that shattered my world. "It's stage 3 cancer. 18 months, the top oncologist said, maybe a little less." I instantly took early retirement, vowing to spend every single waking hour with her. But even then, even as the brutal chemotherapy treatments visibly drained the life from her, she stubbornly kept secrets. There were mysterious, unexplained trips out to Ocmulgee County. There were hushed, closed-door meetings with Margaret Sterling. Her home office door was locked far more often than it was open. "What on earth are you working so hard on?" I would ask gently, worried for her health. "I'm just tying up a few loose ends," she would say with a tired smile. "Please don't worry your head about it." I know I should have pushed her harder, but she was fighting so incredibly hard just to stay alive for one more day. I didn't want to burden her with my nagging. February 27, 2023. A sterile hospice bed was permanently set up in our beautiful master bedroom. Julian visited for exactly 20 minutes, impatiently took a business call, and promptly left. That dark night, Evelyn could barely draw enough breath to speak, but she managed to hold my hand tightly and pull me close to her face. "Arthur." Her voice was nothing more than a raspy whisper. "Trust the farm." "What?" "Evelyn, the old farm out in Ocmulgee. Everything you need is waiting there." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Do not let Julian take it from you. Promise me." I didn't understand the cryptic plea, but I promised her anyway. "I won't let him take it, I swear." "Good." Her tired eyes fluttered closed. "I love you so much." 40 years just wasn't enough time, I whispered through my tears. "It was everything," she breathed. She passed away peacefully the very next morning. February 28th. She was only 64 years old. The funeral service was deliberately small. Margaret Sterling attended. A few loyal, long-time employees from Hayes Energy came to pay their respects, and strangely, Richard Vance was there. He was Evelyn's oldest corporate competitor, the ruthless man she used to bitterly complain about over our family dinners. He stood ominously in the very back of the room, didn't offer a single word of condolences, and simply watched the proceedings with cold eyes. I thought his presence was deeply odd, but profound grief makes everything in life feel surreal. Now, sitting alone in the tiny guest room, I can hear the violent drilling downstairs. They're aggressively tearing apart her sanctuary, the exact place where she meticulously built her empire from scratch. I look down at our faded wedding photo. She's smiling, 24 years old and entirely fearless. "I still don't know what you left out there for me, Evelyn," I whisper to the silent room. "But I promise you I will trust you." March 14th. 16 days left before the eviction deadline. I was quietly carrying my last box of history books out to my old car when Julian abruptly pulled his expensive car into the long driveway. A sleek silver Lexus parked right behind him. A severe-looking man in a tailored navy suit climbed out. He was in his mid-50s, rail-thin, with an expensive leather briefcase in his hand. He smoothed his silk tie and obediently followed Julian up the front walk. "Dad, this is Harrison Cole," Julian announced flatly. "He's a premier elder care specialist. We need to have a serious talk." I slowly set my heavy cardboard box down on the pavement. "About what exactly?" "About your immediate future." Julian pushed open the front door without waiting for an invitation. Inside, in the formal dining room, Mr. Cole quickly spread a thick blue folder across the expensive table. The top page read, *General Durable Power of Attorney in bold, intimidating capital letters. "Mr. Preston," Cole began, his voice as smooth and slick as engine oil. "Your son is deeply concerned about your current mental and physical welfare. This legal document officially authorizes him to manage your personal finances, all real estate property, and make all medical decisions on your behalf during your difficult transition to a much safer living arrangement." I reached out and pulled the dense document closer. The legal print was incredibly small and dense. I scanned the first terrifying page. "The principal hereby grants the agent irrevocable authority over all bank accounts, real property, including any and all parcels located in Ocmulgee County, investment portfolios, and all healthcare decisions, effective immediately upon execution." "Irrevocable," I said slowly, tasting the bitter word. "That legally means I cannot ever change my mind." Cole nodded smoothly. "Correct. It ensures long-term continuity of care." I flipped over to page 3. A massive section was aggressively highlighted in bright yellow ink. Section 12, Emergency Guardianship. In the event the principal is deemed legally unable to manage his own daily affairs, the agent may immediately petition the state court for full guardianship without any prior notice. My chest instantly tightened. "You want total, unquestionable control of absolutely everything, including the farm." Julian leaned forward, resting his tailored elbows on the table. "Dad, the county just filed a massive tax lien against that property. It's $15,000 in back taxes. If you don't pay it in full by May 21st, they will publicly auction the place off to the highest bidder." He tapped the document aggressively. "Sign this paper right now, and I will take care of the entire mess. You won't ever have to worry about a single thing." "And what happens if I refuse to sign it?" Cole tilted his head slightly, like a predator analyzing its prey. "Then we are forced to proceed under Oklahoma State Statute 33101. Your loving son can formally petition the court for emergency medical guardianship on the strict grounds that you are living completely alone at 68, recently widowed, deeply grieving, and possess no stable income whatsoever. A sympathetic judge would very likely grant him temporary legal custody of your remaining assets within 72 hours. I looked at Julian for a long, quiet second. In my mind's eye, I saw him at just 8 years old, sobbing uncontrollably when his pet goldfish passed away, tearfully asking me if it hurt the fish to stop swimming. Then his jaw tightened coldly, and that sweet memory vanished forever. "You would really do that to your own father?" I asked quietly. I'm actively trying to help you, Dad. You're clearly not thinking straight. I closed the intimidating blue folder and slid it firmly back across the polished table. Get out of my house. Cole immediately stood up, snapping his expensive briefcase shut with a sharp click. Julian didn't move an inch. You've got exactly 2 weeks left, Julian said darkly. Think very carefully about this. Because if you refuse to sign it, I will personally file the legal petition, and a county judge will happily decide your future for you. I didn't offer him an answer. The front door eventually slammed. I sat completely alone at the long dining table, staring blankly at the empty space where the blue folder had been. Outside, the sleek Lexus engine purred quietly to life. Evelyn's final voice echoed loudly in my head. Trust the farm. 5 days later, March 19th. I was meticulously clearing out the final remnants of the guest room when I noticed the large recycling bin out by the curb was completely overflowing with discarded papers. Julian had been ruthlessly tossing out Evelyn's old files all week long. I dragged the heavy bin back up the driveway to sort through it, hoping to save some memories. A clean manila folder accidentally slipped out and landed on the concrete. The tab read, Dad Residential Options *, written in Clara's loopy, overly cheerful handwriting. I opened it. Tucked inside were thick, glossy marketing brochures for Sunset Meadows Senior living out in Elk City, Oklahoma. The cover photo showed a depressing, low-slung brick building completely surrounded by flat, dying brown grass. The inside photos proudly featured a sterile dining hall buzzing with harsh fluorescent lights, cheap plastic food trays, and hollow-eyed residents slumped in wheelchairs, staring blankly at a muted television set. Directly beneath the depressing brochures was a fully printed legal contract. Resident name, Arthur Preston. Accommodation level, shared occupancy, Wing B monthly rate, $2,800. Security deposit, $5,600 non-refundable. Target move-in date, April 20th, 2023. Authorized by Julian Preston, power of attorney. The signature line for the resident was totally blank, eagerly waiting for me to sign Cole's blue folder. And then I saw the date printed at the very bottom. Executed, January 28, 2023. I read the date again, my blood running cold. January 28th, exactly 1 full month before Evelyn passed away. While she was still alive, bedridden, fighting desperately for every single agonizing breath, Julian had already coldly signed a corporate contract to lock me away in a dismal facility. My hands shook violently. I pulled out my smartphone and quickly searched Sunset Meadows, Elk City, Oklahoma reviews *, 2.1 stars, 47 reviews. My poor father was left languishing in a soiled bed for 6 straight hours. The nursing staff actively ignored his call button. I reported the abuse. Absolutely nothing changed. The cafeteria food is completely inedible mush. My fragile mother lost 12 pounds in just 2 months. When I complained, management claimed she was just adjusting. Disgusting roaches in the shared bathroom. Management falsely promised an exterminator. He never showed up. Mother's priceless wedding ring mysteriously disappeared from her room. The staff rudely claimed she simply lost it. There was no police investigation and no apology. I meticulously took clear photos of every single page, the signed contract, the depressing brochure, the horrifying online reviews. Then I walked briskly to my old car, popped open the trunk, and safely hid the damning folder underneath a thick wool blanket and a heavy metal toolbox. Back inside the house, I sat heavily on the edge of the guest bed. 11 days left. Julian had meticulously planned this entire nightmare while Evelyn was actively dying. The slick lawyer, the depressing facility, the aggressive timeline, it was all perfectly ready to execute. All he needed was my signature to seal my doom. I picked up the framed photograph resting on the cheap nightstand. Evelyn in her white hard hat at the first oil derrick in 1996, grinning wildly like she had just won the ultimate lottery. Did you know about this? I thought to myself. Did you somehow see this nightmare coming? Outside in the neighborhood, a stray dog barked loudly. A delivery truck rumbled heavily down the residential street. I carefully set the framed photo deep inside my duffel bag, clicked off the cheap lamp, and lay wide awake in the suffocating darkness, mentally counting down the hours. 11 days until I could finally leave this toxic house. 11 days until I finally discovered exactly what Evelyn had left for me out at the rural farm. March 27th. Just 2 days left. The ominous envelope arrived in the late afternoon mail. It was a thick, cream-colored parcel. The return address read, Okmulgee County Tax Assessor **. I tore it open frantically while still standing by the street mailbox. Official notice of delinquent property tax. Property description, 800 acres, Section 14, Township 25 North, Range 8 East. Listed owner, Arthur Preston. Total amount due, $18,577.43. Absolute deadline, May 21, 2023. Penalty for non-payment. Property is subject to immediate public auction per OK Stat Title 68, Section 30-125. I read the horrific numbers twice. $18,577, due in less than 2 short months. My modest teacher's pension paid out exactly $2,100 a month. Even if I completely stopped buying food and medicine, I couldn't possibly cover it. I slowly folded the heavy notice and walked back inside the house like a zombie. Julian was lounging comfortably in the gutted living room, endlessly scrolling through his expensive phone. He didn't even bother to look up. "Did you get something fun in the mail?" he asked smugly. I handed him the paper. He glanced at it casually. "Yeah, the tax lien. I tried to warn you about that exact problem last week." "You told me it was only 15,000, I said numbly. "I was just rounding down." "Legal penalties add up fast." He casually set his sleek phone on the glass coffee table. "Look, Dad, I've really been doing some thinking. You obviously can't afford to pay this off. The farm is completely worthless, just 800 acres of dead dirt and a falling-down horror house. But because I'm family, I'll happily take it off your hands right now. $50,000 cold hard cash. You can use it to rent a very nice, safe apartment in town and live comfortably." I just stared at his smug face. $50,000. That is honestly way more than the dump is worth. I'm being incredibly generous here. And the massive taxes, I'll personally handle them. Consider it a huge family favor. I slowly folded the tax notice back into my pocket. I'll have to think about it. Julian immediately picked up his phone again, bored. "The absolute deadline is May 21st. After that date, the county steals it and you get absolutely nothing. Zero." I walked slowly upstairs without offering an answer. That evening, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was Margaret Sterling. "Arthur, do you have a private minute?" I stepped cautiously out onto the dark back porch. The sprawling yard was pitch black. The beautiful tulip bed that Julian had heartlessly bulldozed was now just an ugly, gaping rectangle of wet mud. "Yeah, I have a minute. I heard through the grapevine that Julian just made you a lowball cash offer on the farm. $50,000. How on earth did you know that?" "Because he arrogantly called my office this afternoon, demanding to know if the estate could legally wave his magical wand and clear the tax lien." She paused, taking a breath. I firmly told him no, the lien is entirely valid, and I reminded him that Evelyn left incredibly specific legal instructions that the farm absolutely must stay with you. "Margaret, I literally cannot pay $18,000. My modest pension barely covers basic rent." "I know that, Arthur, but I need you to listen to me. That farm is worth far, far more than what Julian is offering you. Do not sell it. Not to him. Not to anybody else. Not yet." I tightly gripped the cold wooden porch rail. "Then what exactly am I supposed to do?" "You physically go to the farm on March 29th, exactly like Evelyn asked you to do. You locate and open the sealed envelope. Everything you could possibly need is waiting right there." "Margaret, I desperately need more than cryptic riddles. If I lose that land, you will not lose the land." Her voice was fiercely firm. "Arthur, Evelyn secretly placed the entire farm into an irrevocable trust exactly 18 months ago. It is legally titled solely in your name. No shady power of attorney, no corrupt probate court judge, and absolutely no financial creditor can ever touch it. Julian has zero legal claim to it." I sank heavily into the worn porch chair, my knees weak. "Then why is he pushing me so aggressively to sell?" "Because he knows a massive secret that you don't." and Evelyn knew with certainty that he would relentlessly come after it. She paused again. "There is far more waiting in that envelope than you could ever imagine. Please, just trust her. Just wait 2 more days. What if the county aggressively auctions it off? They won't. The trust Evelyn built explicitly includes a safety provision for delinquent taxes. I have already officially filed an extension request with the county assessor's office. You legally have until June 30th to fully settle the lien." The crushing weight in my chest loosened slightly. "You're absolutely sure about this?" "I am positive." Evelyn thought of every single variable. Margaret's professional tone softened significantly. "Arthur, I am legally bound and cannot tell you what is hiding inside that envelope. She made me swear a professional promise. But I can tell you this fact. She spent 2 exhausting years meticulously preparing for this exact moment. She knew Julian would try exactly what he is currently trying. Not let him win this." I looked out at the dark, ruined yard. Somewhere far off, a dog barked into the night. A car drove past on the street, its bright headlights sweeping across the wooden fence. "Okay," I said quietly into the phone. "I'll wait." "Good, and Arthur, do not sign a single piece of paper, not the POA, not a fake sales contract, nothing. If Julian tries to pressure you again, you call me immediately." "I will. 2 more days, then you'll finally understand." She hung up. I sat alone on the cold porch for a very long time, the heavy tax notice burning a hole in my pocket. Margaret's cryptic words kept circling endlessly in my tired head. The farm is worth far more than his offering. The very next morning, I drove directly to Margaret's downtown office. She was waiting patiently in the large conference room, holding a plain manila envelope that was the exact same size as the one from the dramatic will reading. She slid it silently across the glass table. "This is the second letter," she explained. "Evelyn left it in my care with strict instructions to hand it to you personally on March 28th, exactly 1 day before you are scheduled to open the sealed envelope at the actual farm." I picked it up. My name was written clearly on the front in Evelyn's unmistakable handwriting, strong, slanted, fiercely determined. "What's in it?" "I honestly don't know. She sealed it herself." Margaret neatly folded her hands on the table. "But she specifically told me to remind you of 3 vital things. First, the farm is legally protected. Second, you possess far more hidden resources than you currently realize. Third," she paused, her eyes misting slightly. She said, "Tell him that I am still fiercely looking out for him, even now." My throat immediately tightened with emotion. I nodded mutely. Margaret stood up. "Go to the farm tomorrow morning, Arthur. Open both of the envelopes. And whatever you do, do not let Julian follow you there." I hurriedly left the law office, tightly clutching the thick envelope, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. The farm is worth far more. Irrevocable trust. Everything you need is there. I sat silently in my old truck in the parking lot and just stared at Evelyn's familiar handwriting. Outside, the bright sun was slowly setting, casting incredibly long, dramatic shadows across the cracked asphalt. 2 blocks away, an old church bell slowly rang 6 times. I thought about the terrifying tax notice, Julian's insulting $50,000 offer, the predatory POA, the depressing Sunset Meadows facility, and that damning blue folder. And then I vividly thought of Evelyn, proudly wearing her white hard hat, standing in a golden wheat field the bright summer before she got so sick. She had been shading her eyes against the glaring sun, smiling broadly and saying, "This beautiful land has always been good to us, Arthur. It's got one more massive gift left to give." I turned the key, started the engine, and pulled out onto the busy road. One more day. Tomorrow I would finally discover exactly what she had been fiercely protecting me from, and exactly what she had left behind in the dirt. March 28th. Exactly 1 day left. I jolted awake to the deafening, grinding roar of a massive diesel engine right in the backyard. I frantically threw on my worn jeans and stumbled blindly downstairs. Through the kitchen window, I saw a massive yellow bulldozer violently tearing through Evelyn's beloved rose garden. I sprinted outside completely barefoot. "Stop! Stop right now!" The operator, a young kid wearing a bright high-vis vest, quickly killed the roaring engine. Julian suddenly appeared from around the side of the house, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly annoyed. "What on earth are you doing?" I shouted. It's the new landscaping crew, Julian said calmly, as if discussing the weather. I'm having a luxury pool put in. We're breaking ground today. That is Evelyn's rose garden. It was Evelyn's garden, Dad. This is legally my house now. He turned dismissively to the young operator. Keep going, tear it all up. The massive engine roared back to terrifying life. The heavy steel blade bit violently into the soft soil, ruthlessly ripping through Evelyn's tea roses, her fragrant lavender, her delicate lilies. 20 years of incredibly careful, loving planting was brutally torn up and destroyed in mere seconds. I stood frozen in the wet grass, my chest painfully tight, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. And then I suddenly saw it. One single bush was still miraculously standing at the far edge of the destruction, completely untouched. The yellow rose. Evelyn had lovingly planted it on our 25th wedding anniversary, June 18, 2008. She had deliberately chosen the bright yellow color because it perfectly matched the sundress she was wearing the very first day we met. Every single June, it bloomed as brightly as the actual sun. I walked right past Julian, right past the idling bulldozer, and dropped heavily to my knees in the wet dirt. The bush was relatively small, maybe 3 feet tall, and its fragile roots were shallow. I desperately started digging into the earth with my bare hands. Dad, what the hell are you doing? I didn't bother answering him. I just dug faster, frantically scooping away the rich soil, tearing the fragile roots free from the ground. My raw fingers hit a sharp rock, but I shoved it aside, ignoring the pain. The bush finally came loose. I lifted it incredibly carefully, cradling the heavy root ball against my chest as wet dirt crumbled down my forearms. Julian stepped aggressively closer. You legally cannot take that with you. I turned and looked him dead in the eye. For a very long, tense moment, neither of us spoke a single word. Then I simply turned and walked right past him toward my waiting truck, the yellow rose bush cradled safely in my arms, a trail of dark soil falling behind me like a bleeding wound. Dad, I just kept walking. I laid the precious bush incredibly gently into the truck bed, carefully wrapped its exposed roots in an old blue tarp I found stuffed behind the seat, and drove away without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see Julian standing angrily in the ruined driveway, his cell phone pressed to his ear, watching me leave his territory. That late afternoon, I carefully replanted the yellow rose into a sturdy, weathered whiskey barrel resting on the old farmhouse porch. The rural house itself was quite small, a simple wood frame structure that was badly weathered. The front porch was sagging heavily. The white paint was peeling off in large strips, and the window screens were badly torn. But it was incredibly quiet out here, and more importantly, as mine. I watered the fragile rose until the dark soil was completely saturated, then sat heavily on the crooked porch steps and just stared out at the sprawling fields. 800 acres of dry wheat stubble stretched endlessly toward the horizon. There were absolutely no close neighbors, no roaring bulldozers, no angry suns. Just the howling wind and the massive, open sky. I thought about the 2 sealed envelopes waiting for me inside and Margaret's cryptic words, "Everything you need is there." And Evelyn's gentle voice echoing endlessly in my head, "Trust the farm. One more day. Tomorrow I would finally open it. Tomorrow I would truly know." That night I found it impossible to sleep. I lay uncomfortably on an old, creaky canvas cot in the dusty front room, the windows propped wide open, listening intently to the chorus of crickets outside. Around 11:00 p.m. I heard my cell phone violently buzz. It was a text message from Julian. Thought about my generous offer. The $50,000 cash is only on the table until Friday. I didn't bother replying. 10 minutes later, the phone suddenly rang. I saw Julian's name glaring on the bright screen. I almost hit decline, but something deep inside my gut made me answer it and instantly hit the mute button on my end. Julian had absolutely no idea I was silently listening. "Yeah, I'm currently at the house." His voice came through the speaker, low and incredibly tense. He drove out to that rural dump today. He even took a damn rose bush with him. A short pause. Someone else was clearly talking on the other end, but I couldn't make out the words. I know, but the stupid tax lien is only $18,000 if he accidentally figures out what's hiding under that land. Another tense pause. Drilling rights for the entire section. If he finds out the truth before I finally get him to sign the papers, we lose all our leverage. My pulse instantly quickened. I frantically fumbled for the voice recorder app on my smartphone and slammed the record button. The emergency guardianship petition is completely ready, Julian continued. Cole said we can legally file it on Monday morning if he stubbornly refuses to sell. Then we forcefully move him into that awful place out in Elk City, and I completely take over as his legal conservator. After that's done, the land is 100% ours. I barely dared to breathe. No, he doesn't suspect a damn thing. Margaret has been feeding him some garbage line about a hidden trust, but she doesn't know the whole big picture. Neither does he. Julian laughed, a short, incredibly bitter sound. The guy taught high school history for 40 years. He has absolutely no idea what he's physically sitting on. Silence on the line. Then Julian spoke again. Friday. If he doesn't agree to sell by Friday, we drag him to court. I am not waiting around anymore. The chilling call abruptly ended. I sat frozen in the pitch-dark room, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs, the red recording light still running on my screen. I stopped it and slowly played the audio back. Julian's treacherous voice came through crystal clear. Drilling rights. The whole section. Guardianship petition. Move him into that place in Elk City. I carefully saved the vital audio file, immediately backed it up to my secure cloud storage, and labeled it March 28th Julian call asterisk. Then I lay flat back down on the uncomfortable cot and stared blankly at the dark ceiling. Outside, the fierce wind violently rattled the torn screens. A lone coyote yipped somewhere far off in the distance. Julian wasn't offering me $50,000 out of some sudden burst of familial generosity. He was actively trying to steal something incredibly valuable, something physically buried deep under this very land, something worth far more money than he would ever admit to my face. And Evelyn had known. I thought of the thick, sealed envelope resting in my duffel bag, the mysterious irrevocable trust, Margaret's stern warning, and the 25-year-old yellow rose now safely planted on the porch. Tomorrow I would finally open that envelope. Tomorrow I would discover exactly what Evelyn had been fiercely protecting, and exactly what Julian was desperately trying to steal. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I didn't sleep a wink. I just listened to the howling wind and waited anxiously for the dawn. March 29th, 6:00 a.m. Bright morning sunlight slanted beautifully through the tall, dirty windows of the front room, throwing incredibly long shadows across the bare, scuffed floorboards. I had already finished packing one single duffel bag, a small cardboard box of my favorite history books, and Evelyn's framed photograph, which I had carefully wrapped in a soft towel. Everything else in that mansion, Julian could keep. I was quietly folding my last button-down shirt when I unexpectedly found the hidden note. It was carefully tucked deep into the pocket of Evelyn's old gray cardigan, the soft one she used to wear on chilly mornings. I had randomly grabbed it from her massive closet 2 weeks ago, right before Julian had the movers clear the room. The piece of paper was quite small, clearly torn from a cheap notepad. The blue ink was faded but still perfectly readable. Check the barn attic. Insurance box. Trust Margaret and Sela's. I stared intently at the confusing words. Barn attic. I didn't even know the massive old barn had an accessible attic. And who on earth was Sela's? I carefully folded the fragile note and tucked it safely into my wallet, right next to the beautiful photo of Evelyn in her white hard hat. Then, I walked slowly downstairs for the final time. The massive mansion felt incredibly hollow. Rooms that had once warmly held joyful birthday parties, chaotic Christmas mornings, and fierce arguments over teenage curfew were now just sad, empty spaces with badly scuffed floors and ugly nail holes in the expensive walls. In the grand living room, the plush leather couch was entirely gone. In the massive kitchen, the cozy breakfast table where Evelyn and I used to drink our morning coffee and read the Sunday paper was gone. Even the expensive custom curtains had been violently ripped down. I stood sadly in the empty doorway of Evelyn's demolished office. The custom bookshelves were completely bare. Her massive executive desk was gone. Only a faint, clean outline remained on the dusty hardwood where it had proudly sat for 20 years. I vividly thought of the roaring bulldozer, aggressively tearing through her beautiful roses, the sweaty contractor carelessly hauling away her private filing cabinets. Julian was ruthlessly erasing 40 years of our shared life like it meant absolutely nothing. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully to the heavy front door. Julian was waiting for me on the grand front porch, leaning casually against the expensive rail with his arms crossed defensively. He looked surprisingly tired. There were dark shadows under his eyes and his expensive silk tie was hanging loose. "Leaving so soon?" he asked smoothly. "Yeah." He reached into his tailored suit jacket and slowly pulled out a folded paper check. "Look, Dad, I know things have been incredibly tense between us lately. Let's just end this the right, civilized way. $25,000. Cash it today at the bank, walk away totally clean." I stared down at the crisp check. Just 2 short days ago, he had confidently offered me $50,000. Now it was only 25. His sudden desperation smelled strongly like expensive cologne and nervous sweat. "No, Dad, please be reasonable here. That old farm is literally falling apart at the seams. The land is completely worthless dirt. You're 68 years old. You don't need this kind of massive headache in your life. Just take the easy money. Rent a really nice, safe apartment. Enjoy your golden retirement." I looked at his face for a very long moment. Somewhere deep behind his calculating eyes, I desperately searched for the sweet little kid who used to help Evelyn plant colorful tulips, the boy who cried over a dead goldfish, the young man who called me every single Sunday from his college dorm. I didn't find even a trace of him. I calmly took the crisp check from his hand, deliberately tore it exactly in half, then tore it in quarters and firmly handed the tiny pieces back to him. "I think I'll happily take my chances." Julian's jaw tightened dangerously. "You are making a massive mistake, old man." I picked up my heavy duffel bag and walked steadily to my old truck. Behind me, I heard Julian angrily shout something foul, but I didn't pause my stride. I tossed the bag onto the passenger seat, climbed behind the wheel, and cranked the ignition. In the rearview mirror, Julian stood fuming on the grand porch, his hands shoved deep in his tailored pockets, angrily watching me drive away. I turned out onto the busy main street and absolutely never looked back. The long drive out to Okmulgee County took exactly 2 hours. I left the bustling city of Tulsa far behind, the sprawling suburbs, the crowded strip malls, the endless traffic lights, and headed straight west on Highway 412. The land quickly opened up around me. Flat, endless fields, scattered scrub oaks, rusted barbed wire fences, massive billboards advertising local cattle auctions and old church revivals. A hand-painted wooden sign on the shoulder read, "Fresh eggs, $3 per dozen." I passed straight through Skiatook, then Hominy. The rural towns got progressively smaller and quieter. Massive grain elevators rose up against the bright blue sky like ancient monuments. Beat-up pickup trucks vastly outnumbered sleek sedans. Every third rural mailbox proudly displayed a family name I vaguely recognized from my decades of teaching high school history. Around 8:30 a.m., I finally turned onto County Road 3700, a very narrow 2-lane blacktop that cut aggressively through truly endless, sprawling wheat fields. The wheat was winter-planted, still incredibly green and only ankle-high. In a few sweltering months, it would turn a beautiful, rich gold. Right now, it just looked incredibly fragile. 10 miles straight down the lonely road, I finally spotted the rusted mailbox. The name Preston was painted on the side in badly faded black letters. I turned carefully onto the rough, crunching gravel drive. The farmhouse sat a full quarter-mile back from the main road. It was a small, wood-frame structure. The white paint was peeling terribly, and the roof was visibly sagging on the front left corner. The wooden porch steps were alarmingly crooked. One single window shutter hung loosely by a rusted nail. Standing ominously behind the main house was the massive barn, a sprawling red structure listing slightly to the left, half of its tin roof completely covered in orange rust. I parked the truck in the dirt yard and killed the rumbling engine. Absolute silence. There was no city traffic, no shouting voices. Just the wind rushing through the green wheat and the eerie creak of the heavy barn door slowly swinging on a broken iron hinge. I climbed out and took a long look around. 800 acres. It stretched out endlessly in every possible direction, incredibly flat, totally empty, dotted only with a few resilient scrub oaks and leaning fence posts. It was the exact kind of barren land that city people drove right past without offering a second glance. Julian was totally right on the surface. It looked completely worthless. I thought about his torn-up $25,000 check, the terrifying tax lien, the malicious guardianship petition, the secret overheard phone call, drilling rights, the whole section. He has absolutely no idea what he's sitting on. I pulled Evelyn's tiny note from my wallet and read the faded words again. Check the barn attic, insurance box. Then I looked back at the small house. The heavy, rusted key was still resting safely in my pocket, the exact one Margaret had handed me at the tents while reading. I carefully climbed the crooked porch steps. The old wooden boards groaned loudly in protest under my weight. The fragile yellow rose I had frantically planted yesterday sat securely in its whiskey barrel right by the front door, somehow already looking visibly stronger in the sun. I slid the heavy key into the rusted lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open. Thick dust motes floated lazily in the incredibly dim light. The stale air smelled strongly of old, dry wood and field mice. It was essentially a single room, a basic kitchen and a living area, with a tiny bedroom hidden behind a faded curtain. It was entirely bare except for a rusty metal frame cot, a cheap folding card table, and a heavy wooden trunk shoved roughly against the far wall. I stepped fully inside and closed the heavy door firmly behind me. Sitting neatly on the center of the card table were two envelopes. One was the thick parcel from the will reading, heavily sealed with deep red wax. The other was the plain envelope from Margaret's law office, my name written clearly in Evelyn's unmistakable handwriting. I gently set down my heavy duffel bag, walked over to the flimsy table and picked up the wax-sealed envelope. Outside, the wind rattled the loose window panes. "Okay, Evelyn," I whispered into the quiet room. "Please show me." Then I broke the wax seal. March 29th, 3:00 p.m. I sat uncomfortably at the small card table staring endlessly at the two opened envelopes. Outside, the fierce wind violently gusted against the fragile farmhouse, loudly rattling the loose siding boards. The yellow rose out on the porch swayed beautifully in its whiskey barrel. I picked up the plain envelope from Margaret's office, the one she had handed me just yesterday. I eagerly tore it open. Inside was a single, crisp sheet of paper. "Arthur, by the time you are reading this, you are finally at the farm. I am so deeply sorry I couldn't verbally tell you everything while I was still here, but some dangerous things are much safer written down than spoken aloud. Go immediately to the big barn. The hidden attic access is located in the far northwest corner, directly behind the old hay bales. There is an olive drab military trunk hidden there. The rusted key from the will reading opens it. Absolutely everything you could ever need is inside. I love you. I always have." Evelyn, I read the incredible words twice, folded the paper incredibly carefully, and tucked it safely into my wallet right next to her previous note about the mysterious insurance box. Then, I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from my truck and walked purposefully toward the massive barn. The barn was genuinely massive, 3 soaring stories of badly weathered red wood, the high roof haphazardly patched with sheets of corrugated tin, and massive double doors hanging crookedly on rusted iron hinges. I pulled one heavy door open with all my strength. It groaned terribly, sounding like an old man painfully getting out of bed. Inside, the stagnant air smelled strongly of dry, dusty hay and old motor oil. The late afternoon sunlight slanted beautifully through the wide gaps in the wooden walls, throwing bright, solid bars of light across the packed dirt floor. An ancient, rusted tractor sat abandoned in one dark corner, its massive tires completely flat, its engine a block of solid orange rust. Massive, dusty hay bales were tightly stacked along the entire west wall. I walked directly to the northwest corner. Shining my flashlight beam directly behind the massive bales, I found exactly what she had promised: A very narrow, incredibly steep wooden ladder nailed securely to the wall, leading straight up into the pitch-black darkness. I carefully climbed. The hidden attic had a very low, sloping ceiling. It was completely full of thick, sticky cobwebs and the pungent scent of incredibly old, dry wood. I slowly swept the bright flashlight beam across the cramped space. I saw a few crushed cardboard boxes, a splintered, broken wooden chair, and then, tucked far into the deepest corner under a heavy canvas tarp, a trunk. It was an old, military-style footlocker, painted faded olive drab and securely latched with a remarkably heavy brass padlock. I pulled the rusted brass key from my pocket, slid it smoothly into the lock, and turned it. The heavy lock clicked open effortlessly. I carefully lifted the creaking lid. Neatly arranged inside were 4 distinct file folders, all meticulously labeled in Evelyn's precise handwriting. Geological Survey Data, Julian Evidence, red tab. Richard Vance Conspiracy, blue tab. Trust documents. Resting right on top of the colorful folders lay another sealed envelope, addressed to me in Evelyn's elegant hand. I opened it with violently shaking fingers. Arthur, if you are reading this letter, I am officially gone. And I know Julian has already aggressively tried to steal the farm from you. I desperately need you to know 3 vital things. First, our son Julian completely stole $370,000 from us over the course of 18 months. He actively forged my personal signature on multiple bank withdrawal slips, secretly moved our money through hidden shell accounts, and blatantly lied to our corporate accountant. The red folder contains all the undeniable proof, highlighted bank statements, clear surveillance photos, and his forged documents. I accidentally discovered his theft in September 2022. I deliberately didn't confront him. I set a massive legal trap instead. Second, Julian has been secretly conspiring with a rival oil executive, Richard Vance, since September 2021. They meticulously plan to legally force you into a depressing nursing facility, take total control of the Okmulgee farm through a completely fraudulent guardianship petition, and quickly sell the land for incredibly lucrative drilling rights. The blue folder contains all their damning emails, fake contracts, and illegal wire transfers. It is everything you need to completely stop him in his tracks. Third, this seemingly worthless farm sits directly on top of a massive Mississippian lime shale formation. The official geological surveys estimate there is over $25 million in easily recoverable oil buried here. I have already secretly negotiated an ironclad partnership with Hayes Energy Solutions. They will extract the oil at absolutely no cost to you. You get to keep an unprecedented 75% of the net royalties. That is roughly $2 to $3 million per year. The trust documents folder explains absolutely everything. I legally placed the entire farm into an irrevocable trust, solely in your name. Julian cannot legally touch it. No power of attorney, no fake guardianship petition, and absolutely no creditor can ever take it from you. Section 47C of the trust includes a brutal ethics clause. If Julian attempts to contest my will, commits any fraud, or partners with Richard Vance, he instantly forfeits his entire $12 million inheritance and immediately faces severe federal prosecution. Margaret has all the backup copies. She will fiercely protect you. Arthur, I know how terribly this hurts. I know you desperately want to believe that Julian is still the sweet little boy who helped me plant those yellow roses, but he isn't. He coldly made his adult choices. Do not ever forgive him. Do not let him smoothly charm his way back into your life. Protect yourself. Protect this precious land. It is entirely your future now. I love you far more than I ever managed to say. Trust the farm. Evelyn. I stood in the dusty attic and read the devastating letter 3 full times. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the paper. My chest felt agonizingly tight, as if someone had wrapped a thick leather belt tightly around my ribs and pulled as hard as they could. $370,000, $18 months, hidden shell accounts, masterful forged signatures. He did all of this while his mother was actively dying. I carefully set the heartbreaking letter down and slowly opened the thick red folder. The very first page was a Meticulously handwritten timeline in Evelyn's incredibly neat script. Julian Preston embezzlement timeline, July 15, 2021. $45,000 illegally withdrawn from the Hayes Energy main operating account. Signature expertly forged on the authorization form. Funds quickly transferred to an unknown account ending in 7743, Julian's personal slush fund. November 3, 2021. $85,000 quietly withdrawn from our joint Fidelity investment account. A completely forged POA was submitted to the bank. A clear surveillance photo shows Julian physically standing at the teller window at 2:47 p.m. May 22, 2022. $120,000 pulled from my personal retirement fund. The massive penalty was completely waived via a totally fraudulent medical hardship claim. The notarized document signature does not match my exemplar in any way. January 10, 2023. $120,000 illegally withdrawn from the Hayes Energy executive bonus account. An electronic wire transfer IP was traced directly to Julian's home office computer. Total stolen, $370,000. Directly beneath the horrifying timeline were dozens of official bank statements, aggressively highlighted in bright yellow ink. There were withdrawal slips bearing Evelyn's signature. Except to my trained eye, the handwriting was subtly wrong. The loops on the letters were far too tight. The slant was much too steep. There were crystal-clear surveillance stills taken from the Fidelity Bank branch, clearly showing Julian wearing a sharp suit and happily handing forged paperwork to a smiling teller. There was a bright, official notary seal stamped on a fake hardship form dated just 3 agonizing days after Evelyn's stage 3 cancer diagnosis. At the very bottom of the thick folder was a handwritten note scribbled on a yellow sticky tab. Discovered the theft September 12, 2022. Monitored him closely for 6 months. Meticulously documented every single transfer. Let him arrogantly think he got away with it. Set the trap. I slammed the red folder closed. My stomach turned violently. I stood up far too fast and had to aggressively grab the sharp edge of the military trunk just to steady myself. My own son had coldly stolen from us while his mother was entirely bedridden. While she literally couldn't walk to the kitchen to get a glass of water without my physical help. While I was sitting by her bedside reading to her every single night, holding her frail hand, promising her that everything would somehow be okay. He had expertly forged her name, blatantly lied to federal banks, and spent 18 solid months slowly bleeding our life savings dry. And Evelyn had known everything. She had quietly watched him do it from her deathbed. She had documented every single federal crime. She had built a legal case so incredibly airtight that he couldn't possibly wriggle free. I vividly thought of the tense while reading. Julian sitting arrogantly across from me, looking totally bored, casually checking his phone. The insulting $50,000 cash offer. The $25,000 check I had angrily torn into pieces just this morning. He hadn't been acting out of generosity. He had been completely desperate to hide his crimes. I sat down heavily on the filthy attic floor, leaning my back against the cold trunk, and just stared blankly at the red folder. Outside the barn, a lone crow called out loudly. The fierce wind violently rattled the tin roof. I whispered into the darkness, "You are no longer my son." Then I carefully put the letter and the red folder safely back into the trunk, firmly closed the heavy lid, and slowly climbed down the steep ladder. I had serious work to do. March 29th, 6:00 p.m. I sat at the flimsy card table inside the darkening farmhouse, the trunk open on the floor beside me, the damning red folder still feeling incredibly heavy in my hands. Outside, the bright sun was slowly setting, throwing incredibly long, dramatic shadows across the endless wheat fields. The temperature had dropped significantly. I could easily see my breath pluming in the cold air. I set the red folder carefully aside and pulled out the thick blue one. The tab read, "Richard Vance Conspiracy Asterisk," in Evelyn's sharp, angular script. I opened it slowly. The very first page was an incredibly detailed summary, handwritten by Evelyn and clearly dated October 15, 2022. Richard Vance background. He has been a bitter competitor in the Oklahoma oil and gas sector for over 20 years. He humiliatingly lost 3 massive lease bids directly to Hayes Energy between 2005 and 2018. He holds a massive personal grudge. He aggressively attempted a hostile corporate acquisition of Hayes Energy in 2016. He utterly failed. He is widely known for his highly aggressive tactics, operating entirely in legal gray areas and ruthlessly buying distressed family properties at county auctions. Arthur, this ruthless man, absolutely hates me, and now he is actively using our own greedy son to completely destroy you. The very first contact he made with Julian was on September 2nd, 2021. That means there has been 18 solid months of secret coordination. Do not ever underestimate him. Do not attempt to negotiate. I quickly turned the page. The next alarming document was a fully printed email chain, aggressively highlighted and heavily annotated in Evelyn's red pen. From R. Vance at Vance Petroleum, com to Julian Preston, CPA at September 2nd, 2021, 11:42 p.m. Subject: lucrative opportunity. Julian, we met very briefly at the Tulsa Energy Forum last spring. I've been closely following your impressive mother's company for years. It is an incredibly impressive operation. I'm reaching out directly because I strongly believe there's a highly lucrative business opportunity that could greatly benefit us both. Your parents currently own an 800-acre rural parcel out in Ocmulgee County. Preliminary geological data strongly suggests there are massive, untapped reserves buried there. If you're at all interested in discussing a highly profitable partnership, let's meet up discreetly. Richard Vance, CEO, Vance Petroleum. Evelyn had aggressively circled the word discreetly and written in the margin with thick red ink, red flag. He somehow knew about the massive reserves long before Julian ever did. The very next email was dated September 9th, 2021. From Julian Preston, CPA at to R. Vance at Vance Petroleum, com. Subject: RE. Lucrative opportunity. Richard, I am highly interested. My aging parents don't know the actual value of the land. What exactly are you proposing? Evelyn's handwritten note next to it read, Julian entirely sold us out in one single sentence. I numbly turned the page. There were printed screenshots of text messages, carefully stapled together. October 2021. Richard, Oct. 14, 10:47 p.m. I desperately need to see the official geological survey. Can you somehow access your mother's private files? Julian, Oct. 14, 11:03 p.m. She keeps absolutely everything locked in a safe. I'll try to get the code. Richard, Oct. 22, 9:15 a.m. Time is massive money. Julian, find a way in. Julian, Oct. 22, 10:08 a.m. I am working on it. Directly beneath those texts was an official bank wire transfer record, clearly dated November 28, 2021. Vance Petroleum LLC to Julian Preston, $50,000. Memo line, consulting services. Evelyn's note, the very first payment. Julian officially became a highly paid corporate informant against his own family. I felt my jaw tighten painfully. I kept reading. January 10, 2022. An internal Hayes Energy corporate memo, stamped *confidential, adorned with a sticky note from Evelyn. The official geological survey mysteriously disappeared from my office safe on January 10, 2022. Only exactly 3 people possessed that combination: me, Margaret, and Julian. I immediately changed the physical locks that very afternoon. Just 2 weeks later, Vance Petroleum conveniently filed massive lease applications on the exact adjacent parcels. Coincidence? 0. Next in the stack was a highly detailed contract draft, dated February 18, 2023. Letterhead: Vance Petroleum Proposed Acquisition Agreement. I read the dense legal text slowly. Purchase agreement. Arthur Preston, seller, entirely agrees to sell 800 acres, Section 14, Township 25 North, Range 8 East, Ocmulgee County, Oklahoma, to Vance Petroleum LLC buyer for exactly $500,000. Seller immediately relinquishes all lucrative mineral rights, all surface rights, and any future oil royalties. Buyer fully assumes all expensive drilling, exploration, and commercial extraction operations. Estimated highly recoverable reserves, $25 million. Seller receives absolutely zero royalty participation. I stared in horror at the printed numbers. They wanted to pay $500,000 for $25 million worth of oil. Evelyn had furiously underlined the predatory clause about zero royalties and written in thick red ink, absolute theft. The industry standard for royalties is roughly 12% to 25%. My negotiated Hayes Energy Partnership gives you 75%. Richard's predatory contract gives you absolutely zero. I turned the final page. An email dated March 3rd, 2023. Subject: Final offer from R. Vance at Vance Petroleum. Com to Julian Preston CPA at. Julian, it is time to forcefully close this deal. Your mother's medical condition is rapidly declining. Once she is officially gone, we must move incredibly fast. I will personally pay you $5 million in cash, give you a coveted VP title at Vance Petroleum, and grant you 20% net royalties from the Okmulgee parcel once we successfully acquire it. In return, you must legally get your stubborn father to sign over the entire farm within 90 days of her passing. Use whatever brutal leverage is necessary, threaten guardianship, use that depressing nursing facility contract, apply massive financial pressure. I honestly don't care how you do it, just get it done. The final contract is attached. Let me know. Our Julian's enthusiastic reply was sent that exact same day. Richard, we have a deal. V already heavily researched terrible facilities. There's an awful place out in Elk City called Sunset Meadows, only $2,800 per month. If Dad actively resists, I'll aggressively file for emergency medical guardianship. My high-priced lawyer says it's an absolute slam dunk given his advanced age and his recent tragic loss. I'll forcefully have him sign a POA, and the entire farm legally transfers to me as his conservator. Once the land is legally mine, I will happily sell it to you for the agreed-upon price. I am targeting an April to May timeline. Julian, I read the horrifying email twice. My hands shook so violently the paper rattled. I slowly set the email down and just stared blankly at the dark wall. Julian had completely sold me out. He had sold the precious farm. He had sold Evelyn's entire legacy. All for a measly $5 million and a fancy corporate title, all while she was lying in a hospice bed dying. At the very bottom of the blue folder was one final document, a beautifully handwritten note from Evelyn, dated September 30th, 2022. Arthur, by now you have read all the damning evidence. I know this is entirely unbearable, but you desperately need to understand that I built a massive, unbreakable legal wall completely around you. The farm is safely locked in an irrevocable trust. Julian cannot legally touch it. The brutal ethics clause in Section 47C of the trust document explicitly names Richard Vance. If Julian attempts any shady transaction whatsoever with Richard, or any corporate entity Richard controls, Julian instantly forfeits his entire $12 million inheritance and immediately faces severe federal fraud charges. Margaret has copies of everything. The FBI has copies. It is entirely ironclad. I have also officially secured a lucrative drilling partnership with Hayes Energy. They will start drilling at absolutely no financial cost to you. You get to keep an unbelievable 75% of the net royalties. Industry standard is 12% to 25%. 75% is completely unheard of. I ruthlessly negotiated it because you absolutely deserve it, because this is your precious land, your bright future. Richard's predatory contract would have stolen everything from you. Do not negotiate with him. Do not negotiate with Julian. Let Margaret handle everything. Trust the loyal people I completely trusted. Margaret, Hayes Energy, and Silas Thornton. You'll meet Silas very soon. And Arthur, please do not ever forgive Julian. I deeply wanted to. I honestly tried to. But some betrayals are just far too deep to heal. Protect yourself at all costs. I love you endlessly, Evelyn. I slowly closed the heavy folder. The farmhouse was completely dark now, illuminated only by the very last fading red glow of the sunset peeking through the dirty window. I sat in utter silence. the thick blue folder resting heavily on my lap, my chest feeling completely hollowed out. Evelyn had fiercely fought a massive, invisible war that I didn't even know was happening. While I was sitting by her bed reading history books to her at night, gently holding her frail hand, she was ruthlessly gathering federal evidence, building ironclad legal traps, negotiating brilliant corporate contracts, and fiercely protecting me from a son who desperately wanted to destroy me, and a vicious rival who wanted to steal everything we owned. Outside, the fierce wind picked up again. The yellow rose on the porch swayed beautifully. Somewhere far off in the distance, a heavy truck rumbled down the dirt county road. I finally stood up, folded the thick blue folder and placed it safely back into the trunk right next to the red one. Tomorrow, Julian and Richard Vance would definitely come for me. I was absolutely sure of it. They would make their very final offer, deliver their final, brutal threat, and I would be completely ready for them. March 29th, 7:00 p.m. I was sitting quietly at the flimsy card table, staring endlessly at the closed trunk, when I suddenly heard heavy boots stomping loudly on the porch steps. 3 slow, deliberate knocks followed. I stood up slowly, walked to the front door and pulled it open. A weathered man stood in the incredibly dim light from the single porch bulb. He looked to be in his 70s, with a deeply lined face, wearing a faded flannel shirt and heavy work jeans. He held a large metal toolbox in one hand and a brown paper grocery sack in the other. "Arthur Preston?" he asked gruffly. "Yeah. I'm Silas Thornton. I own the local gas station about 5 miles east of here." He nodded casually toward the dark road. "Evelyn specifically asked me to keep a close eye on this place for her. I figured you'd probably be out here tonight." I stepped aside. "Please come in." Silas set the heavy toolbox and the grocery sack down on the card table. The brown sack, he pulled out a large thermos, a neatly wrapped sandwich, and a bright battery-powered lantern. "There's absolutely no electricity out here," he stated flatly. "The old well is completely dry, too. I brought you some hot coffee and a good supper. The lantern will last you through the long night." "Thank you, Silas." He looked at me intently for a very long moment, then slowly pulled a thick envelope from his flannel jacket pocket. "Evelyn left this envelope with me over 6 months ago. She told me to personally hand you $20,000 in cash if you ever showed up here alone. She said you desperately need it." He handed me the envelope. It was incredibly thick and securely sealed. "She paid me handsomely to watch the farm, aggressively fix the broken fences, and keep all trespassers off the land. I did exactly that. Nobody has been on this property except you." I carefully opened the envelope. Tucked inside were thick stacks of brand new $100 bills. "Silas, I really don't. Don't thank me, Arthur. You thank her." He pointed a calloused finger directly at the military trunk. "She spent 2 grueling years getting completely ready for this. I honestly don't know exactly what's hiding inside those folders, but I know for a fact that your boy and Richard Vance have been lurking around town the last 3 days asking very loud questions about mineral rights. They've been aggressively talking to the county clerk, the tax assessor, and the local drilling commission. They're circling you like buzzards." My chest instantly tightened. "How on earth do you know all that?" "It's a very small town, Arthur. Absolutely everybody knows everything." Silas crossed his massive arms. "Evelyn explicitly told me that if they ever showed up, I should immediately warn you. So here I am warning you. They will definitely be here tomorrow, maybe the day after at the latest. Do not sign a single piece of paper. Do not make any deals with them. Margaret Sterling has your back. And so do I." I nodded slowly, absorbing it all. "Evelyn told you all about M. Margaret? She told me about a whole lot of things." He picked up his empty toolbox. "One more important thing. Check the barn attic again, northwest corner. There is a small metal box hidden directly behind the pink fiberglass insulation marked insurance. Evelyn said you'd know exactly what to do with it." He tipped his worn cap and walked toward the door. "I'll be back here early tomorrow morning with plenty of fresh water and a loud generator. If you need anything at all before then, my personal number is written on the side of the thermos." "Silas," I called out. He turned back. "Thank you, truly." He nodded once, then disappeared completely into the dark night. I stood alone in the doorway, listening to his heavy truck rumble down the long gravel drive. Then I grabbed the heavy flashlight and climbed straight back up into the dusty barn attic. The metal box was exactly where Silas said it would be, tucked safely behind the itchy pink fiberglass insulation. I pulled it out, blew off a thick layer of dust, and popped it open. Inside were flawless photocopies of absolutely everything from the trunk, the damning red folder, the blue folder, the intricate trust documents. Plus, there was a sleek USB drive boldly labeled Evidence FBI Copy Asterisk and a pristine business card. Special Agent Rachel Collins, Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division, Oklahoma City Field Office. I carefully slipped the FBI card into my wallet, right next to Evelyn's final letters. Then, I carried the metal box down, locked it securely in the cab of my truck, and walked back to the quiet farmhouse. Inside, I poured incredibly hot black coffee from Silas's thermos, unwrapped the fresh sandwich, turkey, Swiss cheese, and spicy mustard, and ate it while standing by the dark window. The sprawling fields were pitch black, the vast sky utterly full of bright stars. There were absolutely no streetlights out here, no traffic noise at all, just the howling wind and profound silence. I thought intensely about everything I had learned in the last 12 exhausting hours, the shocking embezzlement, the massive conspiracy, the incredible oil reserves, the unbreakable trust, Julian and Richard Vance endlessly circling the property like hungry wolves, and I thought deeply about Evelyn's massive fortress. Margaret armed with the lethal legal documents, Silas providing the local surveillance, the FBI card resting warmly in my wallet, and the brutal ethics clause that would utterly destroy Julian if he made a single wrong move. I was a 68-year-old retired teacher, sitting alone in a rotting farmhouse with absolutely no electricity and no running water, sitting directly on top of $25 million in crude oil that I couldn't even touch yet. But I certainly wasn't alone. Evelyn had built massive, unbreakable walls completely around me, and I was standing safely inside them, incredibly protected. I finished the hot coffee, set the thermos down on the table, and walked over to the uncomfortable cot. I pulled Evelyn's letter from my pocket, the one from the trunk, and read the final, beautiful line again. I love you more than I ever said. Trust the farm. I folded it incredibly carefully, set it gently on the card table right beside the glowing lantern, and lay down. On the dusty windowsill, I had placed a simple glass jar of water holding 3 fragile stems I had carefully cut from the yellow rose out on the porch. They glowed a faint, beautiful gold in the soft lantern light. Outside, a lone coyote called out. The fierce wind rattled the torn screen door. I slowly closed my eyes, one hand resting softly on the folded letter, and for the very first time in weeks I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. March 31st. 10:00 a.m. I violently woke to the loud sound of heavy gravel crunching under fast tires. 2 expensive vehicles. One engine was incredibly smooth and quiet, the other a heavy, roaring diesel. I sat up quickly on the cot, pulled on my heavy boots, and walked to the dirty window. A sleek black Mercedes sedan and a massive silver Escalade were parked haphazardly in the dirt yard. Julian stepped out of the black Mercedes, wearing a sharp designer suit, his tie perfectly knotted, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. From the heavy Escalade emerged a man I didn't instantly recognize. He was older, perhaps 70, with slick-back gray hair, wearing an expensive charcoal vest over a crisp white shirt, no tie. He moved with the arrogant confidence of someone who was entirely used to being instantly obeyed. Richard Vance. I calmly grabbed my smartphone from the card table, double-checked that the damning audio recording from 2 nights ago was still safely saved, and walked out onto the porch. Julian saw me first. He slowly took off his sunglasses. "Dad, we really need to talk right now." "No, we don't." Richard Vance stepped aggressively forward, his hand extended in a fake greeting. "Mr. Preston, I am Richard Vance. I run a highly successful energy company based in Tulsa. I have been closely following your incredibly difficult situation, and I strongly believe I can help you out." I completely ignored his extended hand. "How exactly?" Richard offered a thin, highly practiced smile. You are unknowingly sitting on a piece of land that is worth significantly more than you realize. The massive tax lien, the intense legal pressure, the daily uncertainty. It is far too much for a man of your advanced age. I am fully prepared to make this incredibly simple. $10 million in cold cash today. You simply sign over the deed to me. I will handle the back taxes, the lien, absolutely everything. You walk away completely free and very rich. I looked coldly at Julian. You actually brought him here. Julian shifted his weight nervously. Dad, it is an incredibly good offer. It's more than fair. You don't have to deal with the county, the rotting farm, any of it. Just take the money. Move somewhere nice and comfortable. Comfortable, I repeated the word slowly. You mean a place like Sunset Meadows? Julian's jaw snapped tight. Richard Vance glanced in confusion between the two of us. I slowly pulled out my smartphone. I really want to play something for you both. I hit the play button. Julian's arrogant voice came blaring through the phone speaker, crystal clear in the morning air. Drilling rights, the whole section, if he accidentally figures out what's hiding under that land. The emergency guardianship petition is completely ready. Cole said we can legally file it on Monday morning if he stubbornly refuses to sell. Then we forcefully move him into that awful place out in Elk City, and I completely take over as his legal conservator. After that's done, the land is 100% ours. Julian went completely pale. Richard Vance's fake smile instantly vanished. I stopped the damning recording. That was from 2 nights ago. Julian had absolutely no idea I was silently listening on the other line. Richard recovered his composure first. Mr. Preston, I honestly don't know what you think you just heard, but I heard my own son actively conspiring to lock me away in a depressing nursing facility just so he could steal my land and illegally sell it to you. I looked directly at Julian. How much was he secretly paying you to ruin my life? $5 million and a shiny VP title. Julian said absolutely nothing. He just stared at the dirt. Richard's voice hardened into stone. You are making a massive mistake here, Preston. That land is completely worthless to you without capital, without heavy equipment, and without industry expertise. I am generously offering you $10 million. That is far more money than you will ever see otherwise. Worthless, I said very quietly. Then why exactly are you standing here? Richard opened his mouth to argue, then abruptly stopped. Julian stepped forward, looking frantic. Dad, don't be stupid about this. The massive oil reserves under this place. He stopped mid-sentence. Far too late. Oil, I said loudly. You just explicitly said oil. Julian closed his eyes in pure defeat. Richard shot him a terrifying look that could have easily shattered glass. And then I heard another heavy engine. A sleek white SUV was speeding up the long gravel drive, a massive cloud of dust trailing behind it. It parked aggressively right beside the Escalade. Margaret Sterling stepped out, clutching her heavy leather briefcase. Right behind her was a man in his mid-40s, wearing crisp khakis and a polo shirt bearing the Hayes Energy logo. Margaret walked straight up to me, looking incredibly calm and perfectly controlled. Good morning, Arthur. I see we have some uninvited visitors. Richard straightened his posture. Margaret, this is a highly private business conversation. Not anymore, Richard. Margaret snapped open her heavy briefcase and pulled out 2 thick sets of legal documents. She handed the very first stack directly to Richard Vance. This is a formal cease and desist order. You are legally prohibited from ever contacting Mr. Preston, making any financial offers on this property, or conducting any business related to this specific land. Any violation will result in immediate, severe legal action. Richard casually glanced at the paper, then glared at Margaret. On what legal grounds? The irrevocable trust formally established by Evelyn Preston specifically names you, Mr. Vance, as a strictly prohibited party under Section 47C. Any attempt by Julian Preston to illegally transfer, sell, or negotiate this property with you, or any corporate entity you control, instantly results in the immediate forfeiture of Julian's entire $12 million inheritance, and massively exposes both of you to severe federal fraud charges. Richard's face went completely still. Margaret smoothly turned her attention to Julian. The second set of legal documents is specifically for you. This is an official notice of a trust violation investigation. If yo You attempt to proceed with any fraudulent guardianship petition, any shady power of attorney scheme, or any secret agreement with Mr. Vance whatsoever, you instantly lose absolutely everything. The Oakwood Estates mansion, the massive investments, the retirement accounts, all of it immediately reverts directly back to your father's estate. Julian just stared blankly at the thick papers resting in his trembling hands. Margaret proudly gestured to the man standing right beside her. "This is Jonathan Hayes, CEO of Hayes Energy Solutions. Mr. Hayes, would you like to officially explain?" Jonathan stepped confidently forward and gave me a respectful nod. "Mr. Preston, your brilliant wife and I fully finalized a highly lucrative drilling partnership over 6 months ago. Hayes Energy will officially begin massive extraction operations on this exact site within 60 days. You will retain an unprecedented 75% of the net royalties. The binding contract was signed yesterday by your attorney, acting legally under the explicit authority granted in Mrs. Preston's trust documents." He turned and looked coldly at Richard Vance. "We have already officially filed all the necessary lease applications with the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. Your desperate competing applications have already been firmly denied." Richard's expression didn't change, but his hands slowly curled into tight, angry fists. Jonathan continued speaking loudly. "Massive drilling operations start in May. The very first production estimates are expected within 15 to 18 months. Mr. Preston will begin receiving massive royalty payments by late next year." Utter silence fell over the yard. Richard slowly turned to Julian. "You swore to me this was handled." Julian said absolutely nothing. Richard looked back at me one very last time, his eyes burning with hatred. "You will deeply regret this." "I highly doubt that," I said calmly. He walked furiously to the massive escalade, climbed in, and sped away without uttering another word, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Julian stood completely alone in the yard, tightly holding the legal papers Margaret had handed him. He looked up at me. His mouth opened, then closed silently. His desperate eyes searched mine, seemingly looking for something, forgiveness maybe, or understanding. I didn't offer him either. I just stared back coldly. He slowly folded the thick papers, slid them numbly into his tailored jacket, and walked heavily to the Mercedes. He sat silently behind the wheel for a very long moment, just staring blankly through the expensive windshield at nothing at all. Then he finally started the engine and slowly drove away. I watched the thick dust settle back onto the empty road. Margaret gently touched my arm. "Are you okay, Arthur?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah." Jonathan Hayes extended his hand warmly. "It is incredibly good to finally meet you in person, Mr. Preston. Evelyn spoke about you all the time. I am so deeply sorry for your profound loss." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Jonathan." Margaret snapped her briefcase closed. "We will be back here early next week to go over the massive drilling timeline in detail. For now, please just rest. You have certainly earned it." They quickly left. The yard was incredibly quiet once again. Just the rushing wind through the wheat and the fragile yellow rose swaying beautifully on the porch. I sat down heavily on the wooden steps and just stared out at the endless horizon. It was finally over. Julian was gone. Richard Vance was gone, and I was still standing. I whispered into the wind, "We did it, Evelyn." The wind carried my quiet voice across the sprawling fields, and for a fleeting moment I could have sworn I heard her gentle answer. April 1st, 11:00 a.m. Margaret and Jonathan Hayes sat comfortably across from me at the flimsy card table inside the farmhouse. Silas had kindly brought the table inside earlier that morning, along with 3 sturdy folding chairs, a massive cooler packed with bottled water, and a loud, portable generator that was currently humming happily outside. The dark farmhouse finally had bright lights. Margaret quickly spread a massive set of documents across the table. "We urgently need to talk about what exactly happens next." I nodded slowly. "Julian is definitely going to fight this. He already is." Margaret pulled out her sleek smartphone and turned the bright screen toward me. It was an email, time-stamped at 10:47 a.m. "Sender, Julian Preston." I read it aloud. "Margaret, I am formally notifying you right now that I will file a massive probate challenge to my mother's will on the strict legal grounds of undue influence and total lack of testamentary capacity." I will also aggressively file an emergency guardianship petition for my father, Arthur Preston, age 68, who is clearly entirely unable to manage incredibly complex financial and operational decisions related to commercial oil extraction. He is currently living in squalor without electricity or running water on a completely dilapidated property. This constitutes severe elder neglect. I fully expect you to immediately withdraw your ridiculous cease and desist order and allow me to act legally in my father's best interest. Julian Preston, CPA. I set the phone down heavily. He actually thinks I'm legally incompetent. He is desperately trying to invalidate the trust, Margaret said calmly. And he's explicitly threatening guardianship again. But here is the massive problem for Julian. He legally cannot do either of those things without instantly triggering the brutal ethics clause. Jonathan leaned forward. What exactly does the ethics clause entail? Margaret pulled a brightly highlighted page from the thick trust document. Section 40, 7C. Evelyn meticulously drafted this exactly 18 months ago with the direct help of a ruthless federal prosecutor. It is completely ironclad. She looked directly at me. Arthur, your brilliant wife knew with absolute certainty that Julian would eventually try to contest the will, so she secretly built a massive tripwire. How does it legally work? Margaret pointed sharply at the document. Julian legally inherited $12 million. The mansion, the massive investments, the retirement accounts. But that entire inheritance is strictly conditional. If Julian takes any of the following aggressive actions, he instantly forfeits the entire $12 million and massively exposes himself to severe federal prosecution. She read directly from the highlighted section. 1. Files any legal challenge whatsoever to Evelyn Preston's will or trust documents. 2. Attempts to obtain guardianship, conservatorship, or power of attorney over Arthur Preston through any fraudulent claims. 3. Enters into any business agreement, partnership, or transaction with Richard Vance or any corporate entity Richard controls. 4. Interacts with or interferes with Hayes Energy's drilling operations or Arthur Preston's massive mineral rights. I stared at her, stunned. If he sues me, he literally loses absolutely everything. Everything, Margaret confirmed. And it gets far worse. She turned the page. The trust includes a brutal clause that automatically and instantly transfers all the damning evidence of Julian's embezzlement and conspiracy directly to the FBI the very second he violates the ethics clause. Bank records, emails, wire transfers, clear surveillance footage. Evelyn documented absolutely everything. Wire fraud carries 5 to 10 brutal years in federal prison. Jonathan whistled low. She completely trapped him in a cage. Margaret neatly folded her hands. Julian currently has 2 clear choices. He can smartly walk away right now, keep his $12 million and live a very quiet life. Or he can stupidly choose to fight, lose absolutely everything and go straight to federal prison. I thought vividly of Julian standing in the dirt yard yesterday, staring desperately at me, searching for an ounce of forgiveness. He's not going to just walk away. I know him. I know, Margaret agreed. She pulled out a pristine, blank document and began writing quickly. That is exactly why I am sending him a formal 48-hour warning right now. If he officially files any petition whatsoever by the end of business on April 3rd, the ethics clause triggers immediately. I will instantly notify the probate court, the FBI, and the federal prosecutor Evelyn worked so closely with. Julian will entirely lose the massive inheritance within 72 hours, and the federal criminal investigation will begin. Will that threat actually stop him? Margaret looked at me seriously. It absolutely should, but I have seen greedy people make incredibly stupid decisions purely out of pride. She capped her expensive pen. If Julian decides to file, he's foolishly betting that a sympathetic judge will somehow side with him over a dead woman's very explicit wishes. That is an incredibly bad bet, but a massive ego makes people very reckless. Jonathan stood up and walked to the window. What about Richard Vance? He's certainly not going to just sit still. Richard is far smarter than Julian, Margaret said. He knows the trust completely blocks him. He will try to annoyingly work around it, buy up adjacent parcels, heavily lobby the local drilling commission, file petty nuisance complaints, but he cannot legally touch this land. And Hayes Energy already holds the ironclad lease. Jonathan nodded. We start aggressive site prep next week. The very first drill rig arrives in early May. Margaret quickly gathered the documents. Arthur, I urgently need to get this warning letter officially notarized and filed today. You will have a copy by tonight. In the meantime, absolutely do not respond to Julian. Do not answer his desperate calls. Do not engage with him in any way. Let me handle it. What if he shows up out here again? Call the county sheriff immediately. You have a strict no-contact order firmly in place. If he violates it, he goes straight to jail. Margaret quickly zipped her briefcase. This nightmare is almost over. Julian has exactly 48 hours to make his choice. My educated guess is he'll cowardly back down once he reads the terrifying consequences. She stood up. Jonathan shook my hand firmly. We will definitely be in touch, Mr. Preston. You are in incredibly good hands. They left. The loud generator hummed steadily outside. The farmhouse was incredibly quiet again. I sat completely alone at the table and carefully reread the ethics clause summary Margaret had left behind. If Julian Preston 1. contests the will, 2. files for fake guardianship, 3. deals with Richard Vance, or 4. interferes with mineral rights, then Julian Preston immediately forfeits the $12 million inheritance and all evidence immediately transfers to the FBI. Charges: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Penalty: 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Evelyn had truly thought of everything. She had built a massive legal cage around Julian so incredibly tight that he couldn't move a single inch without utterly destroying himself. But I deeply knew my son. Arrogant pride didn't listen to cold logic. He had spent 18 solid months meticulously planning to steal this exact farm. He had coldly stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had cruelly tried to lock me away in a horrifying nursing home. And just yesterday, he had stood proudly in this very yard offering a paltry $10 million like he already owned the place. Would he really, truly walk away now? I thought about his aggressive email. I will file a probate challenge. Not I am considering. Not I may. I will. Julian arrogantly thought he could actually win. He thought a judge would simply look at me, a 68-year-old man living in a dirty farmhouse with no running water, and easily declare me incompetent. He actually thought he could effortlessly override Evelyn's brilliant trust, take total control, sell it all to Richard Vance, and walk away incredibly rich. He didn't understand. The trust wasn't just a simple legal document. It was Evelyn's incredibly fierce last stand, and she had made it absolutely unbreakable. I slowly folded the ethics clause summary and tucked it safely into my wallet, right next to her beautiful letters. Outside, the fierce wind picked up again. The yellow rose swayed gracefully on the porch. In the far distance, a lone hawk circled lazily over the endless wheat fields. 48 hours. By April 3rd, Julian would finally make his choice, and I would find out if my greedy son still had enough sense to save himself. I stood up, walked to the dirty window, and stared out at the empty dirt road. Julian thought he could win. He didn't understand. The trust was Evelyn's final war. I turned off the bright lights, securely locked the heavy door, and walked outside into the crisp air. 48 hours, April 3rd, 3:00 p.m. I was sitting quietly on the porch steps, watching the golden wheat fields bend beautifully in the strong wind when my phone suddenly rang. Margaret Sterling. Arthur, it is completely over. I stood up quickly. What exactly do you mean? Julian fully withdrew all of his petitions. His expensive lawyer frantically called me 20 minutes ago. His exact words were, "My client wishes to totally avoid any further conflict and completely accepts the terms of the trust." Margaret's voice was very calm, but I could clearly hear the sharp edge of deep satisfaction. No probate challenge, no fake guardianship petition, no further contact with Richard Vance. He is entirely walking away. I sat back down heavily. The crushing weight in my chest loosened completely, like a massive fist I had been holding tight for weeks had finally unclenched. You're absolutely sure? I am positive. I have the official withdrawal notices right here in writing. They are fully signed by Julian and his attorney, and they were legally filed with the probate court just 10 minutes ago." She paused. "He also sent you a brief email. I'm forwarding it to you right now." My phone buzzed loudly. I quickly opened the forwarded email. From Julian Preston, CPA to Arthur Preston, 1955 date, April 3, 2023, 2:43 p.m. Subject, final communication. Dad, my lawyer has strongly advised me to withdraw all legal actions. I fully accept the terms of Mom's will. I keep the house, the investments, and the retirement accounts. You keep the farm. We are completely done. I don't want any further conflict. I am officially asking you, do not ever contact me again. I need to move forward with my own life. Julian. I read it twice. It was completely cold, incredibly clinical, like he was merely closing a failed business deal. There was absolutely no apology, no genuine acknowledgement of the horrific things he had done. Just, "We're done." I vividly thought of Evelyn's thick folders, the detailed timeline, the clear surveillance photos, the damning emails to Richard Vance, the horrifying Sunset Meadows contract signed while she was actively dying in the next room. I hit reply and typed quickly. "Julian, you coldly stole from your mother while she was bedridden and dying. You expertly forged her signature, blatantly lied to federal banks, and maliciously conspired with her greatest enemy to lock me away in a facility just so you could steal land that wasn't yours. You meticulously planned all of this 18 months in advance. You are no longer my son. Do not ever contact me again. If you do, I will instantly have Margaret file all the evidence with the FBI, regardless of the ethics clause. You will lose absolutely everything and you will go to federal prison. I am completely blocking your number. Do not ever test me. Arthur Preston." I hit send. Then I aggressively blocked Julian's number, his email, and Clara's number from my phone. Margaret was still waiting patiently on the line. "Arthur." I just sent him a final reply. Then I blocked him entirely. Silence. Then Margaret said very quietly, "Good. Is that really it? Is it really truly over?" "Yes, the trust is completely ironclad. Julian has absolutely zero legal recourse left. Richard Vance cannot touch the land. Hayes Energy safely has the lease. You are entirely protected." She paused, her voice softening. "Evelyn built this impenetrable fortress, Arthur. She thought of absolutely everything. All you have to do now is simply live." "Thank you so much, Margaret. You really don't need to thank me. I am just so incredibly glad she trusted me to help." Her voice was extremely gentle. "I will be in touch early next week about the exact drilling schedule. For now, please just rest. You have certainly earned it." She hung up. I sat on the quiet porch, the phone resting in my hand, staring blankly at the blocked contact screen. Julian Preston blocked. I truly thought I would feel something profound, crushing grief, or maybe deep regret. But all I felt was an overwhelming, peaceful emptiness. It felt exactly like a terrible chapter of a book I didn't want to read had finally ended. I thought of him as a little kid, just 8 years old, excitedly building a wooden birdhouse in the garage with me, getting so frustrated because the cheap nails kept bending. I had patiently shown him how to grip the heavy hammer, how to perfectly angle the strike. When he finally got it right, he had looked up at me with this massive, beautiful grin. "I did it, Dad." That sweet boy was entirely gone. Maybe he had been gone for years. Maybe he had never really existed at all. I shoved the phone deep into my pocket and walked inside. An hour later, Silas unexpectedly showed up. I heard his heavy truck pull into the dirt yard, the door slam shut. He slowly climbed the creaking porch steps, carrying a cold six-pack of bottled water in one calloused hand. "I heard you might need some quiet company," he said gruffly. I opened the screen door. "How on earth did you know?" Margaret called me. She said Julian finally backed down. "I figured you'd probably be sitting out here all alone thinking way too much." He handed me an ice-cold water. "Thought you could use a friendly visitor." We sat down heavily on the porch steps. Silas loudly cracked open a bottle and took a long, refreshing drink. I did the exact same. For a long while, neither of us spoke a single word. Just the rushing wind through the green wheat and the eerie creak of the barn door swinging. Finally, Silas spoke up. "Evelyn told me something profound once about Julian." I looked at him closely. "This was way back when she first got really sick. She'd drive out here alone to check on the farm, and sometimes she'd stop by my quiet station for a hot coffee. One gloomy day, she sat at the counter for an entire hour, just staring blankly into her cup. I finally asked if she was doing okay. She looked up and said, "Silas, I'm just trying to figure out exactly when I lost my son." My throat immediately tightened. Silas continued slowly. I gently told her that maybe she didn't lose him at all. Maybe he just deliberately chose a very different path. She shook her head sadly. She said Julian was born desperately wanting more. More money, more social status, more proof that he somehow mattered. She told me, "I truly thought if I just gave him enough, he'd finally be satisfied. But there is absolutely no enough, not for him." Silas looked deeply at me. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "That is his choice. It is not my failure. It is not Arthur's failure. It is entirely his." I stared out at the sprawling wheat fields. I just keep thinking I should have somehow seen it coming. I should have somehow stopped it. How? Silas's voice was gentle but incredibly firm. "He is a fully grown man, Arthur. He coldly made his own choices. Evelyn knew that deep down. That is exactly why she deliberately didn't confront him. She knew with certainty that he wouldn't ever change. So she spent her final years building massive walls to protect you instead." I nodded slowly, letting the truth wash over me. "She spent 2 agonizing years doing it." "Yeah, and it clearly worked." Silas drained the rest of his water bottle. "Julian is officially gone. You are still standing here. The farm is entirely yours. That is exactly what she wanted." We sat in comfortable silence for a few more peaceful minutes. Then Silas slowly stood up and clapped me warmly on the shoulder. "I'll check on you early tomorrow. If you need anything at all, you call." "Thanks, Silas." He walked to his dusty truck, paused with his hand on the door, and looked back. "Arthur, yeah, Evelyn was incredibly proud of you. She specifically told me that too." He climbed in and drove away. That night I sat at the flimsy card table with a cheap pen and a worn notebook Silas had kindly left behind. The loud generator hummed reliably outside. The bright lantern cast a warm, comforting light across the blank page. I wrote carefully, April 3rd, 2023. "Today I officially lost a son. Julian formally withdrew all of his legal challenges. He keeps the massive mansion, the investments, the $12 million. I get to keep the farm. We will absolutely never speak again. I honestly thought I would feel crippling grief, but I don't. I just feel immense relief. He made his choices. He stole from Evelyn while she was dying. He maliciously conspired with her worst enemy. He tried to permanently lock me away. Those were his choices, not mine. Evelyn knew. She saw it all coming. She spent 2 years tirelessly building walls to protect me, and it worked." I paused, staring intently at the page. Then I wrote, "Today I gained a massive future. 800 acres of land, a hidden oil field worth millions, and an incredible partnership that will allow me to live the rest of my life without an ounce of fear. It is a legacy Evelyn left behind because she truly loved me. I am 68 years old. I'm entirely starting over, and for the very first time in months I am not afraid." I slowly set the pen down and firmly closed the notebook. Outside, the fierce wind rattled the torn screen door. The yellow rose swayed beautifully on the porch. I thought of Evelyn, wearing her white hard hat, standing proudly in the wheat field and saying, "This land has always been good to us, Arthur. It's got one more massive gift left to give." She had been absolutely right. I turned off the lantern, lay down on the cot, and peacefully closed my eyes. Tomorrow Hayes Energy would start their massive site prep. Tomorrow my bright future would finally begin. But tonight I just rested. May 1st, 10:00 a.m. Jonathan Hayes pulled into the farmhouse yard in a sleek white Hayes Energy pickup truck, a heavy leather briefcase in hand. I had been waiting eagerly on the porch, my coffee mug half empty, watching the green wheat turn to a bright gold in the stunning morning light. He climbed the creaking steps and shook my hand firmly. "Good morning, Mr. Preston. Are you ready to make all of this completely official?" "Yeah, I am." We sat together at the card table inside. Jonathan opened his heavy briefcase and spread a massive contract across the table. It was 30 pages long, with brightly colored tabs marking all the signature lines. "This is the final drilling partnership agreement Evelyn and I meticulously finalized last October. Let me walk you through it carefully." I pulled the thick contract closer. "First," Jonathan said, "Hayes Energy completely funds all drilling operations. The estimated cost is roughly $8 to $10 million. You pay absolutely nothing. We handle all the permits, the heavy equipment, the labor, everything. I nodded slowly. Second, you retain 100% full ownership of the physical land. The lease grants us only the mineral extraction rights, but the actual farm stays entirely yours. If you choose to sell it someday, the lucrative royalty agreement transfers completely with the deed. Okay. Third, you legally receive 75% of the net royalties. That is calculated after we deduct our operational costs, basic maintenance, transportation, and taxes. It is an extraordinary deal. Evelyn negotiated incredibly hard for that exact number. I thought of her sitting fiercely across from Jonathan, incredibly sick but relentlessly determined, fighting fiercely for me even as the terrible cancer ate her alive. How much money will that actually be? The official geological surveys estimate the highly recoverable reserves at $25 million over the field's total lifespan, which is likely 20 to 30 years. Depending on our daily production rates, you are looking at roughly $2 to $3 million per year, some years slightly more, some years less. $2 to $3 million per year for the rest of my life. Jonathan turned the page smoothly. Fourth, we have already set up a dedicated trust fund for you. $500,000 expertly managed by Sterling Wealth. It will generate approximate $4,200 per month starting on July 1st. That is your steady income while we are actively drilling. Once full production starts, estimated in 18 months, you will receive massive quarterly royalty payments right on top of the trust income. I stared blankly at the staggering numbers. $4,200 a month. That was more than double my old teacher's pension. Are you okay? Jonathan asked gently. Yeah, just. It's a whole lot to take in. It is, but it's exactly what Evelyn wanted. He pointed to the brightly tabbed signature lines. I need you to sign right here, here, and here. Then we officially file it with the state and drilling begins on May 15th. I eagerly signed. My hand shook slightly, but the signatures held strong. Jonathan countersigned, slid the copies into a neat folder, and handed it directly to me. Congratulations, Mr. Preston. You are officially an oil man. I laughed, a short, incredibly surprised sound. I taught high school history for 40 years. I don't know a damn thing about the oil business. You don't need to. That's exactly what we are here for. Jonathan stood up and shook my hand again. The heavy crew arrives early next week. I will keep you fully updated every single step of the way. He left. I sat completely alone at the table, just staring at the signed contract. 75%, $2 to $3 million a year, $4,200 a month starting in July. Evelyn had meticulously done all of this. While I was simply holding her frail hand, reading to her, she had been secretly building a massive empire just for me. I folded the heavy contract and placed it safely into the trunk with her letters. May 15th, 7:00 a.m. I woke up to the deafening sound of massive diesel engines and men shouting loudly. I quickly pulled on my jeans and walked outside. The massive field directly behind the barn was completely full of heavy trucks, flatbeds hauling massive steel beams, a towering crane, a massive trailer packed full of heavy drilling equipment. 20 burly men wearing hard hats and high-vis vests swarmed the site, rapidly setting up safety barriers and unloading heavy steel pipe. A barrel-chested man in his 50s walked briskly over to me. You Mr. Preston? Yeah. I'm Caleb Miller, the site foreman. He shook my hand firmly. We're setting up the very first derrick today. It should be fully operational by week's end. That fast? Mrs. Preston meticulously did all the heavy groundwork for us. Permits are officially filed, geological surveys are perfect. Done. The site prep is completely finished. All we have to do now is drill. He pointed to a specific spot about 200 yards out, clearly marked with bright orange flags. She personally chose that exact location on October 22, 2022. She confidently said the surveys showed the absolute richest pocket was right there. I stared intently at the orange flags. October. Just 1 month after she had secretly discovered Julian's massive embezzlement. While she was actively setting legal traps and gathering federal evidence, she was also meticulously planning this. She was incredibly thorough, I said quietly. "The best client I ever had the pleasure of working with," Caleb said, clapping me warmly on the shoulder. "We'll do right by her memory, you'll see." I watched them work intensely all day. By the late evening, the skeletal steel frame of the derrick rose majestically against the vibrant sky, 30 feet tall and climbing fast. Silas stopped by around 6:00 p.m. and brought fresh sandwiches. We sat together on the porch and watched the exhausted crew bolt heavy crossbeams into place. "Evelyn would have absolutely loved to see this," Silas noted. "Yeah, she would have." "I heard Hayes Energy is hiring local," Silas said. 10 full-time jobs, 20 seasonal. That is incredibly good for this struggling town. "Yeah, my gas station has been significantly busier this past week than the last 6 months combined." He grinned broadly. "You're a major job creator now, Arthur." I laughed loudly. I never thought I'd hear that phrase applied to me. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun slowly set, the towering derrick beautifully silhouetted against a brilliant orange sky. July 25th, 2:00 p.m. I was carefully fixing the sagging porch railing when I suddenly heard loud shouting erupting from the drill site. I dropped my heavy hammer and sprinted. The entire crew was gathered tightly around the base of the derrick, happily slapping backs and hooting loudly. Caleb saw me approaching and frantically waved me over. We hit it. I pushed my way through the cheering crowd at the base of the derrick. A thick black liquid was rapidly pooling in a massive collection tray. It was incredibly thick, shimmering beautifully in the sunlight, utterly unmistakable. The smell was sharp, metallic, and rich. Oil. Caleb grinned wildly. 800 barrels a day, that's our preliminary estimate. That is incredibly strong, Mr. Preston, real strong. I stared down at the massive black pool. It honestly didn't look like $2 million a year. It just looked like thick, smelly mud, but it wasn't mud. It was my massive, undeniable future. How long until full production begins? The full commercial extraction setup will take about 6 weeks, but you're looking at your very first massive royalty check by this exact time next year. I nodded, my throat incredibly tight with emotion. The crew celebrated wildly around me. Loud high fives, jokes, and someone quickly opened a cooler full of cold beer, but I just stood there staring endlessly at the dark oil. Evelyn had known. She had absolutely known it was here. She had fought a vicious war to protect it, and she had entirely won. July 28th, evening. I carefully replanted the yellow rose. The old whiskey barrel had completely cracked under the intense summer heat, so I dug a proper, deep hole at the very corner of the porch, mixed in the rich compost Silas had kindly brought over, and carefully transferred the fragile bush. It had grown incredibly strong new shoots, bright green leaves, and several delicate buds were just starting to form. I watered it until the soil was rich and dark, then sat on the porch steps and looked out at the massive derrick. Bright floodlights now illuminated the entire site, with the crew working grueling night shifts to finish the commercial extraction setup. The steady hum of heavy machinery carried across the quiet fields. In the far distance, the sun was setting, bleeding vibrant red and gold across the vast horizon. I walked slowly out to the derrick. The rich oil flowed smoothly through the thick, clear pipes directly into a massive storage tank, steady and jet black. I stood right beside the derrick, resting one hand on the cold, vibrating steel, and just watched the oil flow. 75% of this was mine. It was enough money to live comfortably on for the rest of my life. Enough to absolutely never worry about bills again. Enough to finally do something truly bigger than myself. I vividly thought of Evelyn in her white hard hat, standing proudly in this exact spot, pointing fiercely at geological maps, telling Jonathan Hayes, "Drill right here." I whispered into the night, "Thank you so much, Evelyn." The wind gently carried my voice across the sprawling fields. The derrick hummed, the oil flowed, and for the very first time since she had passed away, I felt completely whole. August 10th, 6:00 p.m. I was sitting comfortably on the porch, watching the bright derrick lights flicker on as the sun set when Silas's truck suddenly pulled into the dirt yard. He quickly climbed out, his smartphone clutched in his hand. "Have you seen the local news?" he asked urgently. "No, why, what's wrong?" He held up his phone. A video was actively playing, a local Tulsa news reporter standing in front of a sleek, massive glass office building downtown. The chyron on the screen read, "Oil exec arrested, federal charges asterisk." I took the phone with shaking hands. The reporter's voice was crisp and highly professional. Richard Vance, CEO of Vance Petroleum, was officially arrested early this morning by heavily armed FBI agents at his Tulsa corporate headquarters. Federal prosecutors have formally charged Vance with massive wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and severe industrial espionage. According to the damning court documents unsealed today, the massive federal investigation began in late 2021 and was entirely based on undeniable evidence provided by Evelyn Caldwell Preston, the brilliant founder of Hayes Energy Solutions, who incredibly served as a confidential FBI informant right up until her tragic passing in February of this year. I paused the video and stared in absolute shock at the screen. Evelyn, an FBI informant. Silas watched me closely. "You honestly didn't know?" "No, she was secretly working with them this entire time." I handed the phone back, my hands completely numb. "She never breathed a single word of it to me." "She probably didn't want to put you at any terrible risk," Silas noted wisely. He pocketed the phone. "Vance is going down hard, Arthur. It's a massive federal case. They don't arrest powerful billionaires like him unless the evidence is utterly airtight." I nodded slowly, my chest feeling incredibly tight. Evelyn had been fighting a brutal war on two massive fronts, Julian and Richard Vance, and I hadn't known a thing about either until she was completely gone. Silas squeezed my shoulder firmly. "I'll leave you be. Call me if you need anything at all." He left. I sat alone on the porch steps, staring endlessly at the derrick, desperately trying to make sense of it all. 20 months. From September 2021 to February 2023. The entire time she was dying, she had been secretly feeding damning evidence to the FBI, holding clandestine meetings with federal agents, building an unbreakable case, and she had never said a single word. The very next morning, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. "Mr. Preston, this is Special Agent Rachel Collins, FBI White Collar Crime Division. I believe you currently have my card." I pulled out my wallet, the pristine card from the metal insurance box. "Yeah, I have it. We urgently need to talk. Can I come out to the farm this afternoon?" "Okay." She arrived precisely at 2:00 p.m. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a sharp dark suit, a shiny gold badge clipped to her belt. She shook my hand firmly, businesslike, but certainly not unkind. We sat together at the card table. She opened a thick briefcase and pulled out a massive folder. "Your brave wife first contacted us in September 2021. She discovered undeniable evidence that Richard Vance was deeply engaged in industrial espionage, actively stealing proprietary geological data, aggressively bribing county officials, and attempting to illegally manipulate lease auctions. She also informed us that your son was deeply involved." I nodded sadly. "I know. I found the hidden folders in the barn, the blue folder, the Richard Vance conspiracy." "Yeah, that is exactly what we used to build the massive case. Your wife was incredibly meticulous. Every single email, every wire transfer, every secret meeting. She documented it all flawlessly. She met with us monthly for 20 solid months. Even after her tragic cancer diagnosis, she fiercely insisted on continuing the dangerous work." Agent Collins closed the thick folder gently. "She was genuinely one of the most brilliant, dedicated informants I have ever had the privilege to work with." My throat tightened painfully. "What exactly happens now?" "We have officially arrested Richard Vance. He is currently being held entirely without bail. The federal trial is set for next spring. We fully expect a swift conviction. The evidence your wife gathered is completely overwhelming. He is looking at 15 to 20 brutal years in federal prison." "And Julian," Collins's expression shifted very slightly. "We formally approached him 3 days ago. We offered him full immunity in exchange for his complete testimony against Richard Vance. He eagerly accepted." I stared at her. "He gets absolutely nothing. No prison time at all." "Immunity legally means he testifies truthfully, and we don't officially prosecute him for the conspiracy or the wire fraud. But he is certainly not walking away completely clean. He will instantly lose his prestigious CPA license. His corporate reputation is entirely finished. And if he lies on the stand for even a second, the immunity deal entirely voids, and we charge him with federal perjury right on top of everything else. I nodded slowly. Julian would undoubtedly testify. He would easily throw Richard Vance right under the bus just to save his own skin. It was exactly what I expected of him. "We will desperately need your testimony too," Collins said. "You are a primary victim. The terrible embezzlement, the fake guardianship scheme, the horrifying nursing facility contract. Your testimony perfectly corroborates your wife's massive evidence. When do you need me?" "Early next week. We will formally depose you at my office in Oklahoma City. It shouldn't take more than a few hours." "Okay." She stood up and handed me her card again. "If Julian attempts to contact you in any way, do not engage. Let me know immediately. The strict immunity deal explicitly prohibits him from interfering with any witnesses." "He won't contact me," I said firmly. "I already blocked him on everything." "Good." She shook my hand warmly. "Your wife did an incredibly heroic thing, Mr. Preston. She fiercely protected you, built a massive federal case, and entirely took down one of the most corrupt operators in Oklahoma oil. You should be incredibly proud of her." "I am." She left. I sat alone at the table, staring at the thick folder she had left behind. A copy of Evelyn's official FBI statements, detailed transcripts of her meetings, surveillance photos of Vance's office, and the damning emails between Julian and Richard. 20 months. She had carried this massive, terrifying burden entirely alone. August 13th. My phone rang. A blocked number. I let it go straight to voicemail. "Dad, it's Julian. I really need to talk to you. The FBI came to me. They're aggressively offering me immunity if I testify against Vance. I honestly don't know what to do. Can you please call me back, please?" I calmly deleted the voicemail without a second thought. August 18th. Margaret called me. "Arthur, I wanted you to hear it directly from me. Julian officially signed the immunity deal. He is testifying against Vance in exchange for absolutely no prison time. But the state bar permanently revoked his CPA license this morning. He has also been formally fired from his elite consulting firm. It's all over the Tulsa business news networks." "Good. There's actually more. He frantically tried to sell the Oakwood Estates mansion. Absolutely no buyers. The massive scandal is fully attached to his name now. He's completely radioactive in this town." I thought of the massive mansion, the mahogany table where Margaret had dramatically read the will, the beautiful office Julian had callously demolished. He made his choices. "Yes, he certainly did." Margaret paused. "How are you doing, Arthur?" "I'm actually okay. Is the oil production still on schedule?" "Yeah, Caleb says we are completely on track for the first massive royalty checks by next summer." "Good. I will check in with you next month." She hung up. I stood up, walked into the tiny bedroom, and pulled open the drawer of the card table. Inside was the very last photograph I had of Julian. His high school graduation, 1993. He was wearing his cap and gown, grinning brightly at the camera. I had foolishly kept it through absolutely everything, through the cruel eviction, the fake POA, the brutal confrontation. I had told myself it was a reminder of who he used to be. But that sweet boy was utterly gone. Maybe he had never really existed. I deliberately tore the photograph in half, then into quarters. I walked outside and dropped the tiny pieces into the metal burn barrel Silas had set up last month. I struck a match and dropped it in. The photo quickly curled and blackened. Gray smoke rose into the cool evening air. I stood there watching it burn away and whispered, "You chose your path. I chose mine." The smoke drifted lazily across the wheat fields. The derrick hummed loudly in the distance. The yellow rose swayed beautifully on the porch. I turned and walked inside. Tomorrow I would drive to Oklahoma City and give my official testimony. Tomorrow I would help put Richard Vance in federal prison. But tonight I was finally, entirely done with Julian for good. September 15th, 2024. The rural mail carrier knocked loudly on the farmhouse door at 10:00 a.m. I wasn't expecting anything important, just the usual boring bills and ads for tractor parts. But she handed me a massive, certified envelope, thick and incredibly official. Hayes Energy Solutions. Return address, Tulsa. I quickly signed for it, closed the heavy door, and sat at the card table. My hands shook violently as I tore it open. Inside was a crisp paper check and a detailed 2-page royalty report. I slowly unfolded the report first. Hayes Energy Solutions. Official royalty statement. Period. Q2 2024, April 1st to June 30th, 2024. Property, Preston Farm, Section 14, Township 25 North, Range 8 East, Okmulgee County, Oklahoma. Total production, 72,000 barrels. Average price per barrel, $68. Gross revenue, $4,896,000. Operating costs, drilling, transport, taxes, $1,200,000. Net revenue, $3,696,000. Arthur Preston royalty, 75%, $2,772,000. I stared endlessly at the massive number. $2,772,000 for just 3 short months of production. I slowly picked up the check. It was incredibly real. Blue ink. The Hayes Energy logo. My name clearly typed across the pay line. $2,772,000. I set it down incredibly carefully, feeling like it might magically disappear if I moved too fast. For 20 full minutes I just sat there staring at it. The loud generator hummed reliably outside. The towering derrick was entirely visible through the window, its steel frame glinting brightly in the morning sun. A black crow landed on the porch rail, cawed once, and flew away. Finally, I picked up my phone and called Margaret. "Arthur, is everything okay?" The check finally came. The first royalty check. "That is wonderful. Congratulations, Arthur." "Margaret, what on earth do I do with all of this?" She paused thoughtfully. "What do you want to do with it?" I looked out the dirty window at the massive derrick, the golden wheat fields, the beautiful yellow rose blooming at the corner of the porch. "I want to do exactly what Evelyn would do." "Then you already know the answer." I did. November 2024. I sat comfortably in Margaret's pristine office with a yellow legal pad completely covered in messy notes. She had brought in a highly respected nonprofit attorney, a sharp woman named Laura Brennan who specifically specialized in charitable foundations. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Laura asked seriously. $1 million is a massive initial commitment." "I am entirely sure." "Okay, please walk me through your vision." I flipped excitedly to the first page of my notes. 3 main pillars: education, local business, and health. Evelyn brilliantly built her massive company from absolute nothing. She fiercely believed in giving decent people a fair chance. I want to do the exact same thing. Laura wrote it down quickly. Specifics: education, scholarships, $5,000 each for kids right here in Okmulgee County who desperately want to go to college but simply can't afford it. Priority goes to students actively studying science, engineering, or business, the exact fields Evelyn worked so hard in. Good. That is very straightforward. Next, local business grants. $20,000 each for local entrepreneurs trying to start. Small businesses, restaurants, auto shops, service companies. Absolutely no interest, no repayment required whatsoever, just a strict requirement that they must hire locally. Laura nodded approvingly. We can easily structure that as a forgivable loan with specific conditions. What is the third pillar? Cancer patient support. Evelyn fought bravely for 18 agonizing months. I watched the massive medical bills pile up. Expensive treatments, medications, heavy travel to specialists. A lot of rural families simply can't afford that burden. I want to help them cover costs, medical bills, daily transportation, lodging if they are forced to go out of town for their treatment. Laura looked up, impressed. That is significantly harder to actively administer. We would need to build strong partnerships with hospitals and establish strict verification processes. Then figure it out, I said firmly. That's exactly what I'm happily paying you for. She smiled slightly. Fair enough, seed capital. $1 million to start immediately. I will gladly add more as the massive royalty checks keep coming in. Margaret leaned forward. Arthur, you will be getting well over $2 million every single quarter. You'll easily have $10 million in the foundation within 2 short years. Good, then we can help a lot more people. Laura closed her notebook. One very last question. What exactly do you want to call it? I didn't hesitate for a second. The Evelyn Caldwell Preston Foundation. April 12, 2025. The Ocmulgee County Community Center was absolutely packed. Over 150 people, eager students, proud parents, dedicated teachers, local business owners, filled the cheap folding chairs. A massive, beautiful banner hung proudly across the main stage. Evelyn Caldwell Preston Foundation, First Annual Scholarship Awards **. I stood nervously backstage, my hands jammed deep in my pockets, watching the bustling crowd through the heavy curtain. 50 eager students sat in the very front rows, dressed in their absolute best clothes, looking incredibly nervous and wildly excited. 50 amazing kids who had bravely applied for these scholarships. 50 kids who were about to be handed $5,000 each. Margaret touched my arm gently. "Are you ready?" "Yeah." I walked slowly onto the brightly lit stage. The noisy room instantly quieted. I stood awkwardly at the wooden podium, looked out at all the young, hopeful, scared faces, and took a massive, shaky breath. My name is Arthur Preston. Most of you probably don't know me, but you definitely knew my brilliant wife, Evelyn. She grew up just 20 miles from this exact spot. She worked tirelessly in these brutal oil fields for 40 years. She built a massive, successful company, employed hundreds of local people, and she absolutely never forgot where she came from. I paused, gripping the edges of the podium tightly. Evelyn firmly believed that true wealth isn't what you hoard and keep, it's what you generously give away to others. She believed deeply in second chances, incredibly hard work, and helping decent people who just need a little boost to get started. I looked down at my notes, then back up at the crowd. Today, we are proudly awarding 50 scholarships at $5,000 each. That is $250,000 total. It obviously won't cover absolutely everything, but it is a solid start. And here is the only thing I am asking for in return: make her proud. Study incredibly hard, work tirelessly, and when you finally get to where you're going in life, always remember exactly where you came from. Turn around and help the next kid who desperately needs it. The entire room erupted in deafening applause. I stepped back, my throat tight with emotion, and watched as Margaret began calling the names. One by one, the bright students walked proudly onto the stage, shook my hand warmly, and received their thick envelopes. Some cried openly, some grinned wildly. One young girl hugged me so incredibly hard I almost fell right over. The very last name Margaret called was Maya Lynn. She walked shyly onto the stage, 18 years old, dark hair pulled back, her hands shaking slightly. She took the envelope, looked at me, and smiled. "Thank you so much, Mr. Preston. I want to study petroleum engineering exactly like Mrs. Preston did. I really want to be just like her." I vividly thought of Evelyn in her white hard hat, standing so proudly beside that very first derrick in '96. "Don't be like me, Maya," I said very quietly. "Be better. Be exactly like her." She nodded, tears streaming down her young face, and walked happily off the stage. When the wonderful ceremony finally ended, proud parents swarmed the stage, shaking my hand endlessly, thanking me profusely. I nodded, smiled warmly, and said all the right things, but inside my mind I was somewhere else entirely. I was back in that sterile hospice room, holding Evelyn's frail hand, listening to her whisper, "Trust the farm. Everything you need is there." He had been absolutely right. The seemingly worthless farm had given me absolutely everything I needed, and now I was joyfully giving it back to the world. That late night, I stood alone on the farmhouse porch, watching the bright derrick lights blink steadily in the distance. The beautiful yellow rose swayed gently beside me, in full, glorious bloom, as bright as sunlight. I thought of those 50 brilliant students happily holding their envelopes. 50 bright futures that might not have ever existed without Evelyn's incredible vision. I felt hot tears well up, the very first time since she had passed. I whispered into the night, "Evelyn, this is your true legacy." The rushing wind carried my voice across the sprawling fields. The massive derrick hummed reliably, and for the very first time in 2 agonizing years, I truly felt like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I was living the incredible life she had so fiercely built for me, and I was making absolutely sure that it mattered. February 28, 2026. Dawn. I stood peacefully in the rose garden, my breath misting in the freezing air. I turned 70 years old today. It has been exactly 3 years since Evelyn passed away. The beautiful garden had grown massively. 50 stunning bushes were now planted in incredibly neat rows along a smooth stone path that Silas had helped me lay last summer. At the very center stood a simple, sturdy wooden bench, bearing a shining brass plaque bolted to the backrest, Evelyn's Garden Asterisk. It was late February. The roses were completely dormant, their bare, thorny branches dark against the gloomy gray sky. But if you looked incredibly closely, you could clearly see the tiny buds forming tiny, bright green and tight as little fists. In just a month they would fully bloom vibrant yellow as bright as sunlight. I sat heavily on the wooden bench and looked out at the sprawling farm. The massive derrick stood tall in the east field, its bright lights blinking steadily. Beyond it, the wheat was winter planted, ankle-high and incredibly green. The old farmhouse boasted a brand new roof, pristine new windows, and a massive generator that never sputtered out. The barn had been entirely rebuilt, fresh red paint, perfectly straight walls, absolutely zero rust. 3 short years ago, I had been 70 pounds lighter, essentially homeless, sitting miserably in a tiny guest room with an eviction notice and a rusted brass key. I had absolutely no money, no plan, just Evelyn's faded voice echoing in my head. Trust the farm. Now the worthless farm was officially valued at over $25 million. The oil royalties flooded in every single quarter, $5 million a year, as steady as a Swiss clock. The charitable foundation had already given away over $3 million, $150 college scholarships, 60 local business grants, and over 200 desperate cancer patients helped with their crushing medical bills. I thought briefly about Julian. The last I had heard through Margaret, who still quietly tracked these things, he had rapidly burned through $6 million of his inheritance. $3 million vanished on cryptocurrency scams that utterly collapsed. $2 million was gambled away in Vegas casinos. $1 million was wasted on a flashy consulting firm that folded after just 8 pathetic months. Now, he was miserably living in Phoenix, Arizona, aggressively selling used cars to make rent. Clara had completely left him. The massive Oakwood Estates house had finally sold, but the cash was entirely gone. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything at all. Richard Vance was rotting in federal prison, serving his 15-year sentence. He would be 85 years old when he finally got out, if he got out. I heard heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Silas appeared, his trusty thermos in hand. He was 75 now, moving a bit slower but still reliably showing up every single week. "Morning, Arthur. Morning." He sat down beside me, poured hot coffee into the thermos cap and handed it over. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the dark sky slowly light. "I heard back from the university," Silas said proudly. "Maya Lynn is doing real good, petroleum engineering right at the top of her entire class." I nodded, smiling. "That is exactly what this is all about. Evelyn would be so proud." "Yeah, she would." Silas finished his coffee and slowly stood up. "I'll let you be. I just wanted to check in." "Thanks, Silas." He walked back to his old truck, the engine rumbling to life, the gravel crunching loudly as he drove away. I pulled a cheap pen and a folded piece of paper from my warm jacket pocket. I had been carrying it around for an entire week, not entirely sure what to write. Now I finally knew. I wrote, "Evelyn, today is February 28th, 2026. Exactly 3 years since you left me. I am 70 years old today. The farm is thriving beautifully. The oil field you secretly found is producing $7.5 million a year. The foundation has helped well over 400 people. Julian foolishly burned through his entire inheritance. He's selling used cars out in Phoenix. Richard Vance is in federal prison. They both made their terrible choices. I miss you so much. I think about you every single day. I clearly see you in the yellow roses, in the bright derrick lights, in every single scholarship check we proudly send out. But I am okay. I am much better than okay. You made absolutely sure of that. You spent 2 agonizing years building massive walls around me, fiercely protecting me, meticulously planning for this, and it absolutely worked. I don't know exactly how much time I have left on this earth, but I know exactly what I am doing with it. I am living the incredible life you built for me, and I am making sure it matters. Thank you for absolutely everything, for 40 amazing years, for this incredible farm, for truly believing I could do this. I love you, Arthur. I folded the letter carefully, walked back into the farmhouse, and unlocked the heavy military trunk. Inside were all of Evelyn's old letters, the one from the tents while reading, the one from the dusty barn attic, the secret notes she had left hidden in the folders. I placed my new letter gently right on top, firmly closed the heavy lid, and locked it tight. Then I walked back outside into the peaceful garden and watched the bright sun rise over the endless wheat fields. 3 years. A lifetime. A beautiful beginning. The yellow roses would bloom very soon, and I would be right here to see them. When people ask me what I learned from this entire ordeal, I tell them, don't wait until a massive crisis forces your hand to finally understand what truly matters. This family story taught me that true legacy isn't built in total comfort. It's fiercely forged in the terrifying moments when absolutely everything falls apart, and you have to decide who you really are. Some people might call what Evelyn did revenge. I call it fierce, undeniable protection. It was honoring the brilliant woman who spent her final, agonizing years building massive walls around me when I didn't even know I was under attack. Some call it justice. I call it pure love. But here is my best advice. Do not ever let bitter betrayal consume your soul. Julian chose his dark path. I chose mine. The massive difference is that I chose a higher purpose over bitter resentment. The ultimate lesson from this family story is simple. Wealth without deep integrity is completely worthless. Money is merely a tool, never a trophy. What you choose to do with it defines you far more than how much you actually have. Evelyn deeply understood that. She left me far more than just oil. She left me a beautiful roadmap for a meaningful life. If there is a true revenge story here, it is simply this. The absolute best response to those who viciously try to destroy you isn't blinding hatred. It is building something so incredibly good, so powerfully lasting, that their petty cruelty becomes utterly irrelevant. Hundreds of lives changed, brilliant scholarships awarded, local businesses launched, desperate cancer patients supported. That is the ultimate revenge, proving that goodness will always outlast pure greed. Trust in the people who truly love you, and trust in the solid land beneath your feet. That is what saves you when everything else entirely fails. This family story ends right here, but yours certainly doesn't. Protect what truly matters in your life. Build something far bigger than yourself. And when terrible betrayal inevitably comes, consciously choose purpose over poison. Thank you so much for walking this incredible journey with me on this channel. Now, go out there and build your own lasting legacy. Make it truly count. Thank you for staying with me through this entire amazing journey. Please drop a comment and share your deep thoughts. What would you do if you ever found yourself in Arthur's exact situation, inheriting a dirt farm while facing brutal betrayal from your own son? I genuinely want to hear your unique perspective. If this story resonated deeply with you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss any of our future videos. A gentle reminder, while highly inspired by real themes of family inheritance, massive oil field fortunes, and personal betrayal, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content doesn't completely align with your preferences, feel free to explore other videos on this channel that might suit you better. Either way, thank you for being here.